I am Byron, 70 years old, and my phone rang at 6 in the morning. I stared at the bright screen illuminating the dark room. The caller display showed my daughter Morgan. She had not called me before noon in 3 years. I pressed the green answer button. "Dad, Grandpa died last night," Morgan stated. Her voice held the chilling, sterile tone of a corporate transaction. "He left the entire estate and all the commercial holdings to me and Brent. You get absolutely nothing." A harsh, triumphant laugh echoed loudly in the background. My white son-in-law grabbed the phone from his wife. "Pack your bags," Brent ordered. "You have leeched off this family long enough. I am sending a private security team to clear out your annex. You have 30 minutes before they throw your belongings onto the street." The line went dead. I placed the phone on the wooden kitchen table. I did not panic. I did not cry. I looked across the table. My father, Josiah, took a slow sip of his black coffee. At 89 years old, his mind remained sharper than a steel trap. He lowered his mug and adjusted his reading glasses. Brent always was impatient, my father noted quietly. He could not even wait for the fake death certificate to clear the county clerk office. I looked at the man who had supposedly just passed away. He was perfectly healthy and thoroughly annoyed by the interruption to his morning routine. My daughter had completely sold her soul. She wanted me homeless. She wanted her grandfather erased. She made a massive miscalculation. Heavy diesel engines rumbled aggressively outside my window. 3 black tactical vehicles parked directly on my front lawn. The men outside carried heavy steel crowbars to smash my doors wide open. Brent did not give me 30 minutes. He gave me 0. The front door shuddered under a violent kick. The security lead smashed the deadbolt with his crowbar and pushed into my living room. I stood completely still. I did not raise my fists to fight. My knees were entirely ruined from 40 years of brutal manual labor working as a structural engineer. That exhausting labor paid every single cent of Morgan Elite Ivy League business degree. Now she used that degree to hire armed mercenaries to drag her own father out into the mud. The mercenaries expected to find a helpless old man. They did not understand that a master engineer knows every single secret of the house he built. I grabbed my father by his arm. We stepped backward into the pantry. I kicked a false baseboard. A heavy steel grate swung open. I had constructed this hidden ventilation shaft decades ago to protect my family from severe southern hurricanes. Today, it protected us from my own daughter. Josiah climbed down the concrete steps with surprising agility. I followed closely behind him. I pulled the steel grate shut just as the mercenaries stormed into the kitchen. They began tearing apart my cabinets and shouting orders. We crawled silently through the dark tunnel until we reached the detached garage. I pulled the tarp off my vintage restored truck. The old engine roared to life immediately. I smashed through the wooden back gate and drove directly toward the city limits. We needed to secure our financial resources to fight back against Brent. I knew exactly who to call. We sped down the empty highway toward downtown Atlanta to find the only federal lawyer I could ever fully trust to save our family legacy. We were preparing for brutal open legal warfare today. We parked the truck in a secure underground garage and took the freight elevator up to the 20th floor. Ian sat behind his massive glass desk. He was a sharp and ruthless federal lawyer. We had fought many battles together in the past. He looked up from his paperwork and stared at my father. The color instantly drained from his face. Josiah Ian stammered in absolute disbelief. "The county registry notified me an hour ago. Brent submitted your official death certificate at midnight. He immediately activated the succession clause on your commercial accounts." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking application. I needed to transfer emergency cash to a safe offshore account. A bright red warning banner flashed across the screen. My heart sank. I checked my credit cards. I checked my business ledger. Every single account was locked. Brent froze everything I told Ian. He cut off our entire financial supply. Ian typed furiously on his keyboard. "He did not just freeze your personal money, Byron. He used the forged death certificate to take legal control of the entire historic community business collective. Brent is liquidating your life work." Josiah leaned forward, placing his hands flat on the desk. "Brent is arrogant, but he is sloppy. We simply walk into the local police station right now. I will show the authorities my face. We prove I am alive and send Brent to federal prison for massive corporate fraud." Ian stopped typing. He looked at the screen with absolute dread. His hands began to tremble. "You cannot go to the police," Ian whispered. "You cannot tell anyone that you are still alive. If you expose his lie today, you will permanently destroy everything you have ever built in this city for your people. We are trapped in his web." "Why would proving I am alive destroy my legacy?" Josiah demanded. Ian turned his laptop monitor around to face us. "Brent did not just freeze your cash. He used the fake death certificate to secure a $5 million offshore loan against the historic estate. He leveraged the land housing all 50 minority-owned businesses. The funds were wired internationally 10 minutes ago. I stared at the digital documents. The trap was diabolical. If we march into a police precinct and expose the forgery right now, the bank automated fraud protocol will trigger instantly. The federal bank will immediately seize the entire estate to recover their stolen $5 million. Brent forces us to remain silent to protect the community property. His horrific crime buys him enough time to completely launder the stolen cash and vanish. He weaponized our heritage to fund his failing venture capital firm, I concluded grimly. We must find the corrupt doctor who forged the medical records. If we extract a confession before the loan officially clears international waters, we can void the transfer. Ian nodded, opening a search directory. I can trace the digital signature on the death certificate through the medical board database. A sudden violent screech of heavy tires echoed from the street 20 stories below. I rushed to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down. 3 familiar black tactical vehicles swerved aggressively onto the sidewalk, completely blocking the building main entrance. Armed mercenaries poured out, pushing past terrified pedestrians. Brent placed a tracker on my vintage truck. He was not just evicting us anymore. He sent a lethal hit squad to permanently silence the dead man before the offshore transaction finalized. They had finally tracked us down. We were now trapped inside the towering glass skyscraper with absolutely nowhere left to hide today. The deafening screech of tires outside the window left us zero time to deliberate. Brent had not just sent muscle to evict us from the property. He had dispatched a lethal hit squad to ensure the deceased man stayed permanently dead. Ian did not hesitate for a single second. He grabbed a heavy bronze paperweight from his desk and hurled it directly upward. The metal struck the ceiling-mounted fire suppression sprinkler with brutal force. A deafening alarm immediately echoed through the entire skyscraper. Icy water sprayed down upon us in a violent torrent, instantly soaking the floor and blinding the security cameras. "Grab the briefcase," Ian shouted over the piercing siren. We ran out of the office and sprinted down the flooded hallway toward the service sector. The heavy boots of the armed mercenaries pounded against the marble floors just around the corner. They were executing a systematic sweep of the 20th floor. We breached the janitorial supply closet just as the first mercenary rounded the corridor with his weapon drawn. Ian shoved the heavy steel door shut and locked the deadbolt. He pointed to the massive stainless steel trash chute built into the wall. "We cannot take the freight elevator," Ian stated breathlessly. "They will cut the power cables." My father looked at the dark tunnel of the chute. Josiah did not complain about his 89-year-old bones. He climbed inside this metal tube without a single word of protest and slid downward into the darkness. I jumped in right behind him with Ian following closely. We slid down 20 stories in absolute darkness and crashed violently into a massive pile of discarded cardboard boxes in the underground loading dock. We crawled out of the trash receptacle and fled into the alleyway without looking backward even once today. We walked 3 miles through the relentless rain to lose any potential pursuers before securing a cheap room in a rundown windowless motel. The peeling wallpaper and damp carpet provided the perfect invisible sanctuary. Josiah sat on the edge of the sagging mattress to rest his aching joints. I paced the small room like a caged animal. Ian immediately unpacked his encrypted laptop and connected to a secure mobile hotspot. He opened his digital briefcase program to launch a comprehensive forensic analysis of the fraudulent documents. Brent made a catastrophic mistake when he rushed the asset transfer, Ian explained without looking away from his glowing screen. He filed the forged death certificate directly through the automated county registry system to execute the bank loan immediately. Ian deployed a specialized decryption algorithm to reverse engineer the digital watermark stamped on the bottom of the public file. Lines of green code cascaded rapidly down his laptop display. The system searched for a matching medical license number. We waited in absolute silence for 5 agonizing minutes. The computer emitted a sharp ping. "I have a direct match," Ian announced triumphantly. "The digital signature belongs to Dr. Felix Croft. I is the executive medical director at the Silver Pines Luxury Elder Care Facility located on the north side of the city." I clenched my fists in deep anger. I recognized that facility name instantly. Morgan had aggressively suggested moving my father to Silver Pines last month. She claimed it offered the absolute best medical supervision in the state. Instead, she had been secretly laying the groundwork to have her own grandfather legally erased from existence by a corrupt physician. "We must extract a formal confession from Dr. Croft immediately," I stated coldly. The invisible countdown clock was now ticking incredibly fast toward our impending absolute destruction tonight. I instructed my father to keep the motel doors securely locked and headed straight for the Silver Pines compound alone. The luxury care facility resembled a modern fortress surrounded by massive wrought iron fences and heavily armed private security details patrolling the perimeter. I parked my borrowed vehicle 2 blocks away and retrieved a dark blue industrial jumpsuit from a nearby hardware store dumpster. I slipped the grease-stained uniform over my clothes and grabbed a heavy steel toolbox to complete my perfect disguise as an HVAC maintenance contractor. I marched confidently toward the rear delivery entrance instead of approaching the heavily guarded main gate. A bored security guard stood by the metal service doors smoking a cigarette. He held up his hand to stop my approach. "I need to see your official vendor clearance badge before you enter the building," the guard demanded suspiciously. I did not flinch or break eye contact. "I built the complex ventilation systems for this entire property 20 years ago," I stated with absolute authority. "Your primary industrial cooling unit on the east wing roof is currently overheating because the primary thermal sensor failed. If you do not let me fix the pressure valve right now, the system will explode and cause $50,000 in structural damage." The guard hesitated for a critical moment before slowly lowering his hand and buzzing me inside the facility. I walked past the busy kitchen staff and navigated the labyrinth of pristine white hallways with total precision. I had memorized the original architectural blueprints down to the very last electrical socket. I bypassed the main lobby entirely and headed straight for the restricted executive wing where Dr. Croft maintained his opulent private corner office. I was totally ready to face him today and extract the brutal truth right now. I turned the heavy brass handle of the executive office door and stepped inside without knocking. Dr. Felix Croft sat comfortably behind a massive mahogany desk, counting a thick stack of newly minted $100 bills. He looked up from his money and the color instantly drained from his terrified face. Byron Croft stammered in sheer panic, "You are legally dead. You are not supposed to be standing here." I walked slowly across the expensive Persian rug and physically cornered him against his leather chair. I grabbed him fiercely by the collar of his pristine white medical coat. "You signed a fraudulent death certificate for a man who is currently eating breakfast in a cheap motel room," I stated with a cold and quiet fury. "That specific crime carries a mandatory 20-year federal prison sentence for medical professionals. I want the digital records proving Brent paid you to fake the documents right now." Croft trembled violently under my firm grip. He desperately pulled open his bottom desk drawer and threw a small black biometric flash drive across the polished wood surface. "Every single offshore wire transfer receipt from your son-in-law is on that encrypted drive," Croft pleaded weakly. "Brent threatened to ruin my career if I refused to cooperate with his hostile takeover plan." I released his collar and scooped up the crucial piece of digital evidence. I did not notice Croft sliding his trembling hand beneath the edge of his mahogany desk. He covertly pressed a hidden emergency panic button. A deafening siren suddenly erupted through the ceiling speakers. The flashing red strobe lights illuminated the room. Heavy steel security doors instantly slammed shut across the exit frame. The deadbolts locked automatically. I was now completely trapped inside the fortified office as armed guards approached very fast right now. The heavy steel deadbolts locked into place with a solid mechanical thud. Red strobe lights flashed aggressively across the mahogany walls. The deafening siren completely drowned out the sound of my breathing. I did not panic. I reached into my deep canvas pockets and pulled out my heavy steel wrench. I swung my arm backward and smashed the solid steel head directly into the electronic door control panel. Sparks flew into the air. Plastic and wires shattered across the Persian rug. The lock did not release. The internal security matrix was hardwired into the main building grid to prevent physical tampering during a lockdown. I heard the unmistakable thumping of heavy combat boots echoing rapidly down the pristine white hallway. Brent had stationed a highly armed private tactical unit directly outside the executive wing. They were coming to ensure the deceased man stayed buried. I turned around and grabbed Dr. Felix Croft by his expensive lapels. I shoved him hard against his desk. The acoustic ceiling tiles above us offered the absolute only viable exit route. I spent my entire career engineering commercial ventilation systems just like this one. I knew the exact load-bearing capacity of those aluminum support struts. "Get on the desk right now," I commanded with absolute authority. Croft trembled violently, but he obeyed my order. He climbed onto the polished mahogany surface. I climbed up right behind him. The heavy footsteps stopped directly outside the office door. Someone began entering the master override code into the exterior keypad. "Push the tile upward," I ordered Croft. We shoved the square acoustic panel out of its metal frame. I grabbed the cold steel rim of the ventilation duct. I pulled my 70-year-old body up into the pitch-black crawl space as the door opened very fast right now. I dragged Dr. Croft up into the ventilation shaft right beside me. We slid the acoustic panel back into place just as the heavy office door kicked open below us. Bright beams from tactical flashlights sliced through the darkness beneath the metal grate. We held our breath in the cramped space. The dust coated my throat, but I refused to cough. The armed guards searched the empty office and cursed loudly before running back out into the hallway to check the perimeter. Croft lay flat against the aluminum ductwork. He was hyperventilating and sweating profusely. His cowardice disgusted me. I gripped his white coat again to ensure he stayed entirely quiet. "You have the digital transfer receipts on that drive," I whispered harshly. "You are going to testify against Brent in federal court." Croft shook his head frantically. His eyes were wide with genuine terror. Brent did not act alone. Croft whimpered into the darkness. He was only managing the financial cover-up. "Your daughter is the one who executed the medical plan." I froze completely. My blood turned to absolute ice. "Morgan had nothing to do with this," I stated coldly. Croft let out a miserable sob. "She engineered the entire timeline, Byron. Morgan personally visited Josiah 3 times last week. She brought him his favorite meals. She was the one who slipped the lethal chemical agents into his food before you finally broke him out of my facility. She actively tried to murder her own grandfather to greatly accelerate the inheritance timeline." The terrible revelation struck me with the force of a speeding freight train. I had sacrificed my entire physical body working every single day to give my only child a perfect life. She brutally repaid that deep ultimate sacrifice by willfully attempting to execute my father for real estate today. I could not afford the luxury of grieving my daughter right now. I violently shoved the emotional devastation deep down into the very bottom of my soul. I left Dr. Croft shivering in the dark crawl space above his office. I turned my body around and began crawling forward through the narrow aluminum ductwork. The sharp edges of the metal joints mercilessly cut into my ruined knees. The physical pain grounded me and kept my mind totally focused on the mission. I navigated the complex ventilation maze directly over the heads of the armed guards, tearing apart the executive wing. I followed the main thermal exhaust line exactly as I had originally drafted it on the blueprints 20 years ago. I reached the ventilation grate positioned directly above the industrial laundry room. I peered down through the metallic slats. The room was completely empty as the night shift staff prepared the evening dinner service. I kicked the grate out of its frame and dropped silently onto a massive pile of freshly bleached hospital sheets. I quickly stripped off my grease-stained maintenance coveralls. I grabbed a pristine blue janitorial uniform from a nearby supply cart and pulled it over my shoulders. I grabbed a rolling mop bucket and pushed it out into the brightly lit main corridor. I kept my head down and my posture slouched. I walked steadily past 3 different security checkpoints. The heavily armed guards completely ignored the old janitor pushing a mop bucket toward the exit. I pushed the cart right out the front delivery doors and abandoned it by the dumpsters. I walked calmly past the exterior perimeter fence and blended seamlessly into the evening civilian foot traffic. I vanished into the city streets completely undetected, leaving the chaos entirely behind me without looking backward even once today. I traveled back to the windowless motel using 4 different municipal bus routes to ensure nobody tracked my movements. I found Ian sitting exactly where I left him next to my father. Josiah was calmly eating a cold sandwich while reading a local newspaper. I locked the heavy deadbolt behind me and pulled the small black plastic flash drive from my pocket. I placed it directly onto the folding table. Ian immediately snatched the device and plugged it into his encrypted laptop. We crowded around the glowing monitor. We expected to see a massive folder containing every single fraudulent wire transfer receipt Brent had authorized. We needed those exact documents to freeze the offshore accounts before the $5 million vanished permanently. Ian pressed the execution key on his decryption software. The laptop screen instantly flashed a brilliant, aggressive red. A harsh electronic alarm beeped from the computer speakers. A stark warning message completely locked the display system. Ian cursed loudly and hit his desk. "Dr. Croft lied to us," Ian stated with rising panic. "He handed over the right drive, but he failed to mention the military-grade security firewall guarding the primary partition. The drive is biologically encrypted." "What does that specifically mean?" my father asked sharply. "It means we cannot hack the password," Ian replied. "The software requires Brent to physically press his actual thumbprint onto the scanner to open the files. We need his live biometric signature right now." The red screen blinked again. A brutal countdown timer appeared on the monitor, displaying exactly 24 hours remaining. An automated self-destruct protocol had just activated. If we fail to physically secure Brent's actual bare thumb fingerprint right before the digital clock hits absolute zero, the drive will permanently erase every single piece of critical evidence forever tonight immediately. The glowing red countdown timer on the laptop screen dictated our survival. We had less than 24 hours to bypass the military-grade encryption, or the drive would permanently incinerate the offshore wire transfer receipts. Ian did not waste a single second lamenting the impossible odds. His fingers flew across his mechanical keyboard as he breached a restricted financial tracking network. He cross-referenced Brent's recent transaction history with regional cell tower pings. A map of the metropolitan area populated on the screen with a rapidly blinking blue dot. "I have a live location," Ian stated with cold precision. "Brent just charged $12,000 to a corporate account at the Oakmont Heritage Society." My old stomach tightened immediately. Oakmont was a notoriously exclusive country club located deep in the northern suburbs. It was an elite establishment built on generational wealth and silent exclusion. Men who looked like me were only permitted on those manicured grounds if they wore service uniforms or pushed landscaping equipment. "Brent is hosting a massive private victory dinner there tonight," Ian continued while zooming in on the satellite view of the property. "He invited his entire board of directors to celebrate his recent acquisition of your community business collective. He thinks he won the war. We need to steal his raw thumbprint directly from his physical hand while he is surrounded by his closest allies." The security perimeter at Oakmont is incredibly tight. They employ former military contractors to guard the main gates and monitor the camera feeds. I looked at the ticking digital clock on the desk. I did not care about armed guards or elite society rules today. "Print me a detailed schematic of their kitchen loading dock," I commanded him firmly right now. "I know exactly how to get inside that building tonight." I directly contacted an old plumbing union buddy who currently managed the sanitation contracts for the entire Oakmont facility. He gladly lent me a spare vendor keycard without asking any dangerous questions. I arrived at the rear service entrance shortly after 8 o'clock. I swiped the plastic card against the glowing reader. The heavy steel door clicked open instantly. I slipped inside the bustling commercial kitchen and quickly located a discarded catering uniform hanging inside an open staff locker. I pulled the crisp white dress shirt and black vest over my frame. I grabbed a silver serving tray loaded with fresh champagne flutes and walked straight through the swinging double doors into the grand ballroom. The extravagant room was practically blinding. Enormous crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over dozens of wealthy investors wearing custom-tailored tuxedos. I kept my head slightly bowed to blend perfectly into the invisible background of the serving staff. I navigated carefully through the dense crowd until I spotted my target. Brent stood near the center of the room, surrounded by a captivated audience of powerful corporate executives. He held a heavy crystal whiskey glass in his right hand. I positioned myself quietly behind a marble pillar to observe his movements. My blood boiled as I listened to his arrogant boasting. "We finalized the acquisition of that dilapidated downtown sector today," Brent announced loudly to his peers. "The local residents fought us hard, but they lacked the capital to stop progress. We are bulldozing that entire historic business district at dawn. We will pour concrete over those ancient storefronts and build a massive industrial waste processing plant. It will generate $80 million in profit during the first fiscal quarter alone." The investors laughed and raised their glasses to toast his incredibly ruthless corporate victory here tonight. I remained perfectly still, hiding behind the cold marble pillar. I needed his raw physical fingerprint to unlock the encrypted flash drive before the digital timer reached 0. The biological scanner required a pristine, unsmudged print to successfully bypass the massive digital security wall. Brent lifted the heavy crystal tumbler to his lips and drained the remaining amber liquid in one large gulp. He laughed at a joke made by a visiting senator and gestured wildly with his empty hand. A passing waiter immediately offered him a fresh cold cocktail from a shiny silver tray. Brent carelessly slammed his empty whiskey glass onto a nearby cocktail table and grabbed a new drink. He turned his back to greet another wealthy associate. This was my singular window of opportunity. I stepped smoothly out from behind the stone pillar and glided toward the small circular table. I kept my posture completely submissive, matching the exact body language of the hired catering staff. I reached into my black vest pocket and withdrew a clean silk napkin. I did not touch the sides of the crystal tumbler. I deliberately draped the smooth fabric over the top rim and gently scooped the heavy glass off the wooden surface. The oils from his right thumb were now perfectly preserved against the smooth, crystalline exterior. I placed the wrapped evidence safely onto my silver serving tray alongside the empty champagne flutes. I maintained a steady, brisk pace as I maneuvered back through the dense crowd of celebrating executives. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I kept my breathing entirely controlled. I urgently needed to exit the grand ballroom and deliver the biometric key to Ian immediately. I finally reached the swinging wooden doors and pushed my way back into the dimly lit service corridor, completely undetected right now. The heavy wooden doors swung shut behind me, cutting off the loud classical music from the grand ballroom. I exhaled a sharp breath of relief in the quiet hallway. I held the silver serving tray securely against my chest, ensuring the crystal glass did not shift inside the silk napkin. The service corridor connected directly to the kitchen loading dock where I could slip out into the rainy night completely unnoticed. I walked past a row of large administrative offices toward the exit sign. A heavy brass door suddenly clicked open to my left. The private VIP lounge emptied into the same hallway. I froze in my tracks. My daughter stepped out into the dim light. Morgan wore a stunning emerald green designer gown purchased with the very same money her husband stole from my father. She held a sleek cell phone to her ear discussing the impending demolition permits for the historic estate. She turned her head and our eyes locked instantly. The color drained from her perfectly manicured face. She instantly recognized her legally deceased grandfather's son completely disguised in a cheap catering uniform. I stood absolutely still, gripping the biometric evidence tightly. I foolishly hoped to see a single ounce of genuine remorse in her dark eyes. I prayed she might feel a sudden burst of guilt for attempting to murder her own grandfather and rendering her father homeless. Morgan did not apologize. She did not hesitate. Her expression hardened into a mask of pure corporate ruthlessness. She dropped her expensive phone onto the carpet and pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. Intruder Morgan immediately screamed at the top of her lungs, echoing down the very long hall. "Security breach right here in the hallway. Lock down the entire building perimeter right now and arrest this man tonight." Morgan screamed at the top of her lungs for the security team to lock down the entire building perimeter and arrest me immediately. Heavy combat boots pounded against the hardwood floors of the adjacent hallway. Two massive armed guards rounded the corner with their tactical weapons drawn and aimed directly at my chest. I did not attempt to reason with my daughter or negotiate my surrender. I relied entirely on my sharp survival instincts. I ripped a heavy red industrial fire extinguisher straight off the plaster wall mounting bracket. I pulled the metal safety pin and squeezed the trigger with absolute brute force. A massive, thick white cloud of chemical powder violently erupted from the nozzle. The dense fog completely blinded the charging security guards and filled the narrow corridor with choking dust. I threw the heavy metal canister directly into the knees of the closest guard. He collapsed onto the floor, groaning in severe pain. I used the temporary chaotic distraction to sprint blindly through the thick white smoke toward the rear exit door. Morgan coughed violently behind me and shouted desperate orders that nobody could follow. I slammed my shoulder against the heavy steel push bar of the emergency exit. The door burst open into the freezing night air. I stumbled out onto the wet asphalt of the narrow back alleyway. I quickly stripped off the crisp white catering shirt and black vest to avoid immediate detection by the street cameras. I blended effortlessly into the dark shadows of the urban landscape while police sirens began to wail loudly in the distance. I clutched the silk napkin holding the crystal glass tightly against my chest. I successfully escaped the elite country club with the biometric key and vanished into the city entirely undetected right now to survive completely safely today. I traveled across the sleeping city using 3 different underground subway lines to absolutely ensure no private security forces tracked my movements. I finally reached an abandoned commercial warehouse situated near the industrial shipyard exactly at midnight. Ian stood outside waiting patiently in the freezing rain next to a sleek black vehicle. He quickly opened the heavy metal door and introduced me to his elite forensic contact sitting inside. The quiet technician wore dark-rimmed glasses and immediately unpacked a highly specialized digital scanning kit onto a makeshift steel table. I carefully unrolled the silk napkin and placed the heavy crystal whiskey glass under the bright fluorescent work light. The forensic expert meticulously dusted the curved, smooth surface with a fine magnetic powder to reveal the hidden biological evidence. A perfectly preserved thumbprint materialized clearly against the crystal exterior. The technician utilized a high-resolution laser scanner to digitize the unique ridge patterns into a 3-dimensional model. He transferred the complex biometric file directly into Ian Waiting's laptop computer. We plugged the encrypted black flash drive into the primary USB port. The hostile red countdown timer displayed exactly 4 hours remaining until total data incineration. Ian initiated the bypass protocol using the newly acquired digital fingerprint matrix. The software analyzed the fabricated biometric signature for 10 agonizingly long seconds. The screen suddenly flashed a brilliant, welcoming green color. The military-grade encryption firewall completely collapsed. We successfully breached the protective barrier and gained total access to the hidden internal files. Ian opened the primary master folder labeled with Brent corporate seal. We fully expected to find simple wire transfer receipts confirming the $5 million fraudulent offshore loan transaction. We instead discovered a massive collection of legally binding contracts that revealed a far more devastating and horrific conspiracy waiting for us tonight. Ian quickly scrolled through the dozens of scanned legal contracts illuminating the screen. He read the fine print rapidly while his face grew increasingly pale. The $5 million offshore loan was nothing but a calculated, deceptive smokescreen, Ian revealed in a hushed, terrified voice. Brent never intended to use that stolen money to rebuild his failing venture capital firm. He used the forged death certificate to unilaterally sign away the entire historic property title. He secretly sold your fatherland directly to a massive industrial waste corporation. My blood ran completely cold as I stared at the irrefutable evidence. My father, Josiah, had spent 50 years painstakingly cultivating that specific land to support and protect 50 diverse minority-owned businesses. It was the proud beating heart of our entire local community. Brent sold our deeply cherished heritage for $12 million untraceable dollars, I noted with absolute disgust. He deliberately orchestrated my father's fake death to completely bypass the strict preservation clauses protecting the property deed. He handed over our sacred ground to be utterly destroyed by toxic chemical factories. Ian clicked on the final attached document inside the encrypted folder. It was a certified demolition schedule officially signed by the Municipal Zoning Board. The Industrial Waste Corporation possessed full legal permits to completely bulldoze the entire historic business district. The destruction timeline was permanently finalized. The heavy construction machines were already scheduled to break ground immediately. They are not waiting for the end of the month to start tearing down those buildings, Ian stated frantically while pointing at the official timestamps. They are commencing the absolute destruction of your historic legacy right now. The bulldozers are scheduled to arrive and completely level the entire historic estate at dawn, which is exactly only 6 short hours away from us right now tonight. Ian immediately began drafting a massive emergency federal injunction to block the demolition crews. We needed to file the paperwork with a judge before the morning light broke over the horizon. Suddenly, the laptop screen froze completely. The secure wireless connection dropped instantly. The small room plunged into a terrifying silence as the power grid to Ian's encrypted network crashed without warning. Someone had deliberately severed the primary data connection to the warehouse. A harsh buzzing sound shattered the tense quiet. Ian's personal cell phone vibrated violently against the metal table. The caller ID displayed an unknown number. Ian hesitated for a second before answering the call and placing the device on speakerphone. Brent's cold and arrogant voice echoed loudly through the small space. "You truly thought you could hide from me in the city," Brent mocked ruthlessly. "My security teams tracked your digital footprint the moment you accessed that flash drive. I know exactly where you are hiding right now." I leaned closer to the phone. "You cannot stop us from exposing your fraud," I stated firmly. "We have the absolute proof of your illegal offshore transactions and the forged death certificate. We are destroying your entire corporate life tonight." Brent let out a dark, terrifying laugh. "You are not destroying anything, Byron," he replied with chilling confidence. "I visited your pathetic windowless motel 30 minutes ago. Your security measures were terribly inadequate." I heard a muffled groan in the background. My blood froze solid. Josiah, my 89-year-old father, had been forcibly taken. "I have the old man secured in my vehicle," Brent threatened maliciously. "I will execute him tonight unless you bring that original decrypted hard drive to me right now. He currently possesses my elderly father, Josiah, and completely controls our entire survival right now, tonight, forever." I stared at the black cell phone resting on the metal table. Brent expected me to panic and surrender the decrypted flash drive to save my father. I reached out and pressed the mute button. I looked directly into Ian's terrified eyes. "We are not giving him the original files," I stated with absolute conviction. "That drive is the only piece of evidence keeping our historic business district from becoming a toxic wasteland at dawn." Ian grabbed his hair in pure frustration. "He has Josiah hostage right now," Ian argued frantically. "If we do not comply with his demands, he will execute an 89-year-old man." I grabbed the authentic flash drive from the laptop and shoved it deep into my heavy canvas jacket pocket. "My father built that community from nothing 50 years ago," I explained firmly. "Josiah would rather die tonight than watch Brent bulldoze his entire legacy tomorrow morning." I grabbed a blank backup drive from Ian's equipment bag. "I am going to the scrapyard to face my son-in-law alone. You are going to take the real evidence to the federal judge we discussed. You must secure that emergency demolition injunction before the sun rises." Ian packed his laptop with shaking hands. "Brent will kill you when he realizes you brought a fake drive," Ian warned me. I grabbed my steel wrench from my tool belt. "I have survived far worse predators than a desperate venture capitalist," I replied coldly. I walked out into the freezing rain, leaving Ian to execute his critical mission. I stole a rusted maintenance van from the alleyway. I drove aggressively through the dark industrial sector toward the abandoned riverfront scrapyard. I prepared my mind to face the ultimate monster I had foolishly welcomed into my family today safely altogether. I parked the stolen maintenance van directly outside the rusted chain-link fence of the desolate riverfront scrapyard. Two heavily armored black vehicles idled quietly in the muddy clearing ahead of me. I stepped out into the pouring rain and walked steadily toward the glaring headlights. Brent leaned arrogantly against the hood of his luxury vehicle, completely protected by 4 armed mercenaries. He wore an expensive tailored Italian suit that cost more than I used to earn in an entire year of hard labor. "You actually showed up alone," Brent mocked ruthlessly as I approached the muddy clearing. "You always were a stubborn, uneducated grease monkey trying to play a rich man game." I ignored his pathetic insults. I kept my posture completely rigid and my expression entirely blank. "Where is my father?" I demanded with absolute authority. Brent laughed loudly and gestured toward the second vehicle. "Your father is resting comfortably in the trunk," Brent replied maliciously. "He lived a very long life catering to poor people in a dirty neighborhood. I am simply helping him conclude his miserable legacy. It is truly pathetic that you black people cling so desperately to worthless dirt. That land is finally going to be useful once the toxic waste plant paves over it forever." I did not flinch or react to his disgusting racism. I knew his extreme arrogance was his absolute greatest weakness. "Hand over the decrypted files right now," Brent commanded sharply while snapping his fingers at me. I reached slowly into my damp canvas jacket. I pulled out the blank backup flash drive. I tossed the tiny black device carelessly onto the wet dirt directly at his expensive leather shoes. "You can take your digital files," I stated coldly to him, "right now today, without any hesitation at all, right now, forever." One of the heavily armed mercenaries immediately stepped forward and picked up the muddy flash drive from the wet ground. He handed the tiny black device directly to a nervous technician standing safely behind Brent. "Bring my father out here immediately before you access those specific files," I demanded firmly without breaking eye contact. Brent ignored my command completely. He waved his hand dismissively at the anxious technician to proceed with the data extraction process. "Verify the offshore transaction receipts right now." Brent ordered his hired computer specialist aggressively. The technician quickly plugged the decoy flash drive into the primary port of his expensive military-grade tablet. He swiped his fingers across the glowing screen to open the master folder. I watched his facial expression instantly change from focused confidence to absolute sheer panic. Ian had meticulously preloaded that specific backup drive with a highly aggressive destructive malware virus right before I left the warehouse. The digital trap sprang into action immediately. A bright, blinding white light violently flashed across the expensive tablet display. The internal cooling fans shrieked loudly as the processor hopelessly attempted to fight the vicious digital infection. A harsh, continuous beep echoed across the rainy scrapyard. The tablet screen abruptly shattered into a massive web of dead gray pixels. The expensive machine was completely bricked in less than 10 seconds. "It is entirely dead," the technician stammered fearfully while dropping the smoking tablet onto the muddy ground. "There are absolutely no digital files on this particular drive. It contained a massive destructive localized computer virus." The arrogant smirk immediately vanished from Brent's pristine face. He realized he had been completely outsmarted by the uneducated mechanic he continuously despised. I stared at him with absolute calm satisfaction as the realization shattered his pathetic corporate ego in the pouring rain. Brent erupted into a terrifying violent rage the second he realized the critical evidence was entirely gone. His sophisticated, wealthy facade completely crumbled away, revealing the desperate, vicious animal lurking underneath. He lunged forward and brutally shoved his own technician backward into the thick, freezing mud. "You think you can humiliate me, you worthless old fool," Brent screamed hysterically while wiping the rain from his flushed face. He reached inside his tailored Italian suit jacket and aggressively withdrew a suppressed black handgun. He marched directly toward me and pressed the cold metal barrel firmly against the center of my forehead. The 4 armed mercenaries instantly raised their tactical rifles, preparing to execute me and dump my body in the river. I did not close my eyes or beg for my life. I stared directly down the barrel of his weapon with absolute unshakable defiance. "I already gave the authentic drive to my federal lawyer," I stated coldly to him. "The emergency demolition injunction is being signed by a judge right now. You have completely lost the historic estate forever." Brent tightened his fingers slowly around the steel trigger. "Then I will simply take your miserable life as payment for my massive financial losses," Brent growled with pure lethal intent. He prepared to fire the fatal shot right into my skull. The deafening roar of a massive industrial diesel engine suddenly shattered the tense silence. Before Brent could squeeze the trigger, the towering corrugated metal wall of the scrapyard violently exploded inward. A gigantic rusted tow truck smashed brutally through the steel barrier, sending massive debris flying everywhere. My 89-year-old father, Josiah, sat securely behind the steering wheel. He aggressively accelerated the heavy stolen machine directly over the hoods of Brent-parked luxury vehicles, completely crushing their engines into the mud. I threw myself through the passenger door of the rusted tow truck just as Brent raised his weapon again. Josiah did not hesitate. My 89-year-old father slammed the heavy gear shift into reverse and crushed the accelerator pedal to the floor. The massive diesel engine roared with deafening mechanical fury. The reinforced steel bumper obliterated the remaining sections of the corrugated metal fence, sending jagged shrapnel flying into the freezing rain. Brent and his hired mercenaries opened fire immediately. Searing hot lead tore through the humid night air and violently shattered our rearview mirrors. I kept my head tucked below the rusted dashboard while bullets repeatedly impacted the thick metal tailgate behind us. Josiah spun the heavy steering wheel with incredible precision, completely evading the lethal crossfire. We burst out of the desolate riverfront scrapyard and merged aggressively onto the empty industrial highway. The fierce adrenaline pumped rapidly through my veins as I watched the dark city blur past our shattered windows. I pulled the authentic encrypted flash drive from my deep canvas pocket to ensure the critical evidence survived the intense ambush. We had successfully escaped Brent and his lethal trap tonight. However, we were running entirely out of time right now. I glanced desperately at the glowing dashboard clock. The bright green digital numbers read 5:45 in the morning. A pale orange glow began to silently breach the eastern horizon. The brutal storm clouds finally broke apart, revealing the absolute worst possible reality. Dawn had officially arrived in the city right now. The strictly scheduled demolition deadline was firmly up. We sped frantically down the empty highway toward the historic business district, praying we could reach the property before the giant, merciless industrial machines completely erased our cherished family legacy from existence forever right here today. We swerved violently onto the familiar avenue leading directly toward our deeply cherished community estate. A terrifying cloud of thick gray dust was already rising rapidly into the morning sky. Josiah slammed the rusted brakes and we skidded to a harsh stop precisely 50 yards away from the main entrance. I stared out the shattered windshield in absolute, unadulterated horror. 4 massive, bright yellow industrial bulldozers were actively advancing upon the beautiful property line. Their gigantic steel tracks chewed mercilessly through the ancient cobblestone sidewalks. The heavy metallic blades slammed brutally into the intricate wrought iron gates my father had personally forged by hand 50 long years ago. The beautiful historic metal snapped loudly and collapsed completely into the dirt. They were actively destroying half a century of hard-fought minority progress in mere seconds. A large flatbed transport truck idled loudly near the center of the ongoing destruction. My own daughter Morgan stood very triumphantly on the huge flatbed trailer. She wore a tailored designer trench coat and held a bright red megaphone in her right hand. She aggressively barked out harsh, continuous commands to the merciless demolition foreman. She did not look remorseful. She looked entirely victorious. She was brutally supervising the absolute eradication of her own grandfather legacy simply to cover her husband's massive financial debts today. My blood boiled with a pure, righteous fury I had never felt before in my entire 70 years on this earth. My ruined knees throbbed violently, but I refused to let the physical pain slow my determined movements right now. I reached for the cold, rusted door handle with sheer, unshakable resolve. Josiah grabbed my shoulder tightly to warn me against acting rashly, but my final decision was already firmly made. I pushed the heavy metal truck door entirely wide open right now. I stepped firmly out of the protective rusted cabin and planted my heavy work boots onto the damp morning asphalt. The freezing morning air stung my face, but I did not blink. I walked calmly and deliberately directly toward the leading yellow machine. The massive diesel engine roared aggressively, shaking the very ground beneath my feet. The operator stared down at me from his highly elevated glass cabin, completely confused by my incredibly sudden appearance. He blasted his deafening air horn to warn me away. I did not retreat a single inch. I marched straight into the direct path of the towering steel blade. I stopped exactly 5 feet away from the crushing metal edge. I folded my arms tightly across my chest and stood entirely rigid like a deeply rooted oak tree. My father had literally bled into this soil to build 50 flourishing businesses for our forgotten community. I was absolutely not going to let some indebted white venture capitalist pave over our sacred history to build a toxic waste plant. The giant bulldozer lurched forward, attempting to call my bluff. The sharp steel blade stopped merely inches from my stomach. The heavy tracks ground to a complete sudden halt, throwing thick chunks of mud into the air. The operator cut the throttle entirely, refusing to run over a silent elderly man in broad daylight. The remaining 3 machines immediately powered down their enormous engines in sheer confusion. An eerie, sudden silence fell over the entire demolition site. Morgan dropped her bright red megaphone onto the flatbed trailer. She stared at me in absolute shock. I looked directly up into my daughter's completely terrified eyes. I was making a final unbreakable stand to protect my father's legacy from her brutal greed forever right now today, entirely alone standing here now. Morgan quickly recovered from her initial shock and immediately recognized a very powerful psychological weapon. She pulled her sleek cell phone from her designer coat pocket and instantly initiated a massive live video stream. She aggressively turned the camera lens toward her own face and began weeping hysterically for her large public audience. "My father is experiencing a severe violent mental breakdown," Morgan sobbed loudly into the phone microphone. "He suffers from advanced dementia and is deeply hallucinating that my grandfather is still alive today. He is actively endangering the innocent construction workers on this site right now." She effectively weaponized my profound grief to assassinate my public character in real time. The wailing sound of multiple police sirens abruptly shattered the tense morning silence. 3 heavily armored local police cruisers swerved aggressively onto the ruined cobblestone property. 6 armed officers jumped out of their vehicles and rushed directly toward the massive yellow bulldozer. They did not attempt to understand my peaceful protest. The lead officer aggressively grabbed my shoulder and forced my arms behind my back. "You are officially trespassing on private corporate property," the officer stated coldly while snapping cold, heavy steel handcuffs onto my wrists. I told them my father Josiah owned the land and was sitting securely inside the rusted tow truck parked nearby. The lead officer scanned the digital county database on his mobile terminal. He shook his head with deep professional pity. "Josiah has been legally dead since yesterday morning," the officer replied firmly. The officers forcefully dragged me away from the demolition line. Morgan handed the police a forged medical power of attorney. The lead officer officially mandated an involuntary psychiatric hold. I was thrown brutally into the secure back seat of a medical transport van, completely isolated from Ian and my father right now tonight. The padded steel door slammed shut with a deafening metallic echo, cutting off the last sliver of natural light. Byron stood stripped of his jacket, his belt, and his boots, left wearing nothing but coarse paper scrubs that offered no warmth against the freezing concrete floor. The isolation cell smelled faintly of bleach and old despair. The fluorescent light overhead hummed with a cruel flickering persistence, painting everything in a nauseating shade of sickly yellow. He pressed his spine against the padded wall, feeling the icy draft creeping through the gaps. His calloused hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the crushing weight of betrayal that settled heavily onto his chest. His mind drifted back a decade to the bitter winter he worked 16 hours every single day at the repair shop. He remembered the gnawing ache in his stomach, the way he skipped breakfast and lunch every afternoon for an entire year just to save enough cash. He had survived on tap water and leftover crusts of stale bread, ignoring the dizzy spells and the constant fatigue, all for a single purpose. On her 18th birthday, he had handed Morgan the keys to a fully restored sedan, her face glowing with pure joy. He had spent his blood, sweat, and health to give her total independence, to ensure she would never feel the humiliating burden of poverty that had plagued his own youth. Now that same daughter had signed the commitment papers with a cold, unblinking glare. She had traded his decades of quiet sacrifice for corporate leverage, locking him inside a high-security psychiatric ward to permanently silence the truth. The irony cut deeper than any physical blade. Byron closed his eyes, drawing a slow, deliberate breath. The ache in his heart hardened into an unyielding resolve. He remained. The heavy lock disengaged with a sharp metallic clack and the steel door swung open. A man stepped into the sterile cell carrying a leather clipboard and a silver tray. He wore a crisp lab coat, but his arrogant posture and calculating eyes lacked any trace of medical compassion. Byron squinted against the corridor light, instantly recognizing the face from the leaked financial files Ian had provided. This was Dr. Vance, the senior partner of Dr. Croft, the chief corrupt psychiatrist overseeing the dark money transfers. Vance smiled thinly, locking the heavy door behind him, leaving only the two of them inside the confined space. He set the tray onto the small metal table bolted to the floor. "Mr. Byron," Vance said, his tone dripping with condescension, "you have become an exceedingly expensive nuisance to our associates. Morgan made it clear that your sudden onset of profound amnesia is the most elegant solution for everyone involved." Byron stayed perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the doctor's calculated movements. Vance picked up a glass vial and a long syringe from the tray. He plunged the needle through the rubber stopper, drawing a thick amber liquid into the chamber. "This chemical compound is quite remarkable," Vance murmured, tapping the glass cylinder to dislodge a tiny air bubble. "A massive dosage administered directly into your bloodstream will induce a permanent neurological shutdown. You will not die, of course, but your working memory, your identity, and your inconvenient recollections of Morgan's fraud will simply evaporate into dust." Vance stepped closer, his gaze devoid of human warmth. "Nobody listens to a brain-damaged patient in a state facility," the doctor added softly. Byron felt his pulse steady into a cold rhythm. He evaluated the precise distance between the needle, the tray, and the man's vulnerable throat. Time slowed. Byron did not offer a single word of protest. Years spent working under the hoods of rusted engines had taught him that wasted speech never fixed a broken machine. While the arrogant doctor was busy filling the glass barrel, Byron's calloused fingers had silently located a loose structural bolt anchoring the iron bed frame to the floor. Using the precise leverage of a seasoned mechanic, he worked the threaded steel fastener free, concealing the heavy bolt within his cupped right palm. As Vance lunged forward with the gleaming needle raised toward Byron's neck, Byron exploded into action. He ducked beneath the doctor's extended arm, swinging the improvised metal weapon with brutal mechanical accuracy. The solid steel bolt struck Vance squarely on the kneecap with a sickening crunch. The corrupt psychiatrist shrieked in agony, his leg collapsing beneath him as he crashed heavily onto the wet concrete. Before Vance could recover, Byron seized the doctor's wrist, twisting it sharply until the glass syringe slipped free and shattered against the floorboards, its toxic amber contents pooling harmlessly into the drainage grate. Without pausing to breathe, Byron dragged the groaning physician toward the far corner of the room. He grabbed the heavy iron bed frame, digging his bare feet into the floor for traction, and hauled the solid metal structure across the tiles. He jammed the bed headboard directly beneath the heavy steel door handle, creating a rigid, unyielding lever that locked the door from the inside. He knocked the small metal table over, wedging its legs tightly against the frame to reinforce the barrier. The cell was now an impenetrable fortress. Byron stood back, wiping sweat from his forehead, his breath coming in steady, controlled bursts as he waited for the inevitable assault. His mind was clear, sharp, and ready for battle. Silence fell. Shouts echoed down the hallway outside, followed by the heavy, rhythmic thud of steel striking steel. The psychiatric ward orderlies had brought a heavy battering ram to clear the barricade. Each impact rattled the hinges, sending dust flying from the ceiling tiles. Byron braced his legs, holding the iron bed frame in place with every ounce of remaining strength. Sparks flew as the metal door handle buckled under the relentless pressure. On the fourth strike, the frame gave way with a violent snap, and the steel door slammed wide open. A wave of armored orderlies flooded the cell, throwing their weight onto Byron before he could recover his footing. He fought back fiercely, but the sheer force of 4 men pinned him face down against the freezing tiles. They wrenched his arms behind his back, snapping heavy plastic restraints around his wrists. One orderly pressed a heavy knee into his spine, while another prepared a fresh sedative drawn from an emergency kit. Vance groaned from the corner, shouting at them to finish the job immediately. Just as the needle hovered an inch from Byron's exposed shoulder, a sharp, commanding voice shattered the chaos. "Federal agents, freeze where you stand." A tall man, dressed in a dark, tailored suit, stepped into the doorway, holding a black leather folder aloft. He flicked it open, flashing a polished brass FBI badge that glittered beneath the harsh fluorescent bulbs. Behind him stood Ian, breathless but holding a stack of federal warrants. Ian had deliberately bypassed the corrupt local police department, taking the dark money files directly to the federal authorities. "Release him right now," the agent ordered, his voice cutting through the room like an iron blade. "This entire facility is officially under federal seizure." The orderlies froze instantly. Byron looked up, knowing justice had finally arrived. The tall federal agent stepped over the groaning psychiatrist and swiftly unlocked the heavy plastic restraints binding my wrists. He pulled me up from the freezing concrete floor with a very firm grip. He introduced himself as Special Agent Carter and led me straight out of the chaotic psychiatric ward without answering a single question from the bewildered hospital staff. Ian waited outside by a black federal vehicle with a grim expression on his face. Carter opened the back door and motioned for me to get inside immediately. As we sped away from the oppressive medical facility, Carter handed me a thick dossier filled with highlighted financial documents. He explained that Brent had made a catastrophic error when he moved the stolen $5 million. He attempted to layer the transaction through a series of anonymous shell companies located in the Bahamas. That massive sudden movement of capital directly triggered an international wire fraud alert within the federal banking oversight system. The authorities were actively monitoring his accounts before Ian even walked into the local field office. I felt a brief surge of relief, thinking the nightmare was finally concluding right now. I asked Carter why Brent was not already sitting inside a federal holding cell today. Carter shook his head with deep professional frustration. He stated that financial crimes require an incredibly high burden of proof to execute an immediate arrest warrant against a wealthy corporate entity. Brent possesses the financial resources to flee the jurisdiction long before a grand jury convenes. The federal agents were effectively paralyzed by strict bureaucratic red tape today. We needed an undeniable smoking gun to force a magistrate judge to sign a rapid apprehension order. Our digital evidence was completely insufficient to authorize an immediate tactical raid on his heavily guarded private corporate estate tonight. Ian slammed his fist against the leather seat of the moving federal vehicle. He explained that Brent retained a ruthless team of elite corporate defense attorneys who had already submitted an aggressive legal countermeasure. His lawyers formally claimed that every single digital file on our decrypted hard drive was entirely fabricated by a disgruntled family member seeking financial revenge. They successfully argued that digital scans could be easily manipulated using modern software, eliminating their validity as probable cause. Carter turned around from the passenger seat and confirmed the harsh reality. The federal prosecutor refuses to sign an apprehension warrant based solely on contested digital photographs. We need the authentic physical document to secure a conviction. We must obtain the original wet ink loan contract bearing the forged signature of your father, Josiah. The document provides irrefutable physical proof of the fraudulent offshore transfer and the subsequent massive money laundering operation. I leaned back against the seat, processing the massive hurdle blocking our path to justice. I asked Carter exactly where Brent kept the original physical paperwork. Carter tapped his tablet screen, bringing up a heavily classified architectural schematic. The original contract is securely locked inside a private underground vault at the central bank downtown. The bank strictly requires dual physical authentication to open that specific safety box. The federal government cannot simply walk inside and demand access without a signed warrant, which we cannot get without the document itself. We were caught in an impossible legal paradox created by the very system designed to protect us. Brent had brilliantly insulated himself behind impenetrable layers of extreme corporate security and rigid banking protocols. We needed to bypass the entire legal framework entirely if we intended to expose his massive financial conspiracy and save my family historic estate right now today, very soon indeed, immediately. I stared at the glowing architectural schematic displayed on Carter's tablet. The central bank underground vault was an impenetrable fortress built with reinforced steel and monitored by sophisticated biometric sensors. The federal agents could not legally bypass the heavy security doors, but I was not constrained by their rigid protocols. I spent 40 years managing commercial construction projects across this entire city. I knew the intimate structural weaknesses of every major downtown high-rise because I personally supervised the installation of their core ventilation systems. I leaned forward and proposed a highly illegal social engineering heist to retrieve the crucial physical evidence. The federal agents stared at me in stunned silence as I outlined my deeply reckless plan. I explained that I could easily infiltrate the bank by posing as a municipal fire inspector conducting a mandatory emergency structural audit. The building management would never dare refuse entry to a city official threatening to shut down their operations over critical fire code violations. Once inside the main utility sector, I could physically splice a bypass cable into their closed-circuit security feed. This maneuver would completely blind the cameras observing the underground vault corridor, giving me a narrow window to breach the safety deposit box unobserved. Ian strongly objected to the dangerous idea, warning me that getting caught inside a federal bank vault would result in decades of mandatory prison time. I looked at my lawyer and reminded him that losing my father's legacy to a toxic waste corporation was a fate far worse than any jail cell. Carter quietly nodded his head in slow agreement. He offered to provide me with forged municipal inspector credentials and a temporary digital override code to unlock the specific deposit box. We finalized the details of our risky infiltration immediately today, right now, entirely securely. A sharp electronic tone interrupted our urgent strategic planning session inside the armored vehicle. Carter pulled a heavy encrypted communication device from his jacket pocket. He listened intensely to the secure federal dispatch line for a tense minute before his expression darkened completely. He ended the transmission and looked directly at Ian with absolute grim urgency. Federal surveillance teams just intercepted a highly classified phone call, Carter announced coldly. Brent officially realized his domestic accounts are being aggressively monitored by international financial authorities. He knows the offshore money laundering scheme is rapidly collapsing around him. Carter tapped the display screen to show us a specific flight manifest. Brent just booked a luxury private jet departing for the 9 o'clock tonight. He paid an exorbitant cash bribe to secure an immediate unlisted departure slot. I is fleeing the jurisdiction permanently to avoid prosecution completely. My chest tightened as I processed the terrifying new information. I asked Carter what would happen to my daughter Morgan if Brent successfully escaped the country with the stolen funds. He is intentionally leaving her behind to face the incoming federal indictments entirely alone, Carter explained ruthlessly. He designated Morgan as the primary signatory on the fraudulent medical records and the illicit land transfer deeds. When the federal prosecutors drop the hammer, she will absorb the entire devastating legal fallout. She will spend the rest of her life in a maximum security penitentiary while he drinks cocktails on a tropical beach. I stared at the dashboard clock illuminating the dark cabin interior. It was exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon. We possessed exactly 4 short hours to physically breach the impregnable underground vault and retrieve the authentic wet ink forged document before Brent completely vanished into thin air forever tonight without a trace today. I stepped out of the unmarked federal surveillance van and walked briskly toward the soaring glass facade of the central bank tower. Special Agent Carter had procured a pristine municipal fire inspector uniform that fit my frame perfectly. The dark navy canvas jacket bore official city seals and a heavy brass badge pinned securely to the breast pocket. I carried a metal clipboard clamped tightly over a thick stack of fabricated safety citations. My heavy work boots echoed against the polished marble floor of the expansive main lobby. The evening rush had completely subsided, leaving only the late-shift corporate employees and heavily armed private security guards patrolling the vast open space. I adjusted my posture to project absolute, unshakable authority. I had spent 40 years commanding massive commercial construction sites across this entire city. I knew exactly how municipal inspectors operated when they intended to leverage their bureaucratic power to terrify corporate management. I marched directly past the velvet ropes of the public teller stations and approached the restricted access turnstiles. A towering security guard in a tailored dark gray suit stepped directly into my path and raised a thick hand to block my forward movement. He stared down at my uniform with deep professional suspicion. I did not break my stride or lower my gaze. I stopped merely inches from his chest and shoved the heavy metal clipboard directly under his nose. I am conducting an emergency structural fire code audit ordered directly by the city fire marshal tonight, I stated with a cold and aggressive voice. Your primary suppression valves on the subterranean level flagged a critical pressure failure alert 30 minutes ago. I need immediate physical access to your underground utility sector before this entire high-rise structure becomes a catastrophic blazing inferno right now to prevent destruction. The towering security guard narrowed his eyes and crossed his muscular arms over his broad chest. He completely ignored the fabricated citations attached to my metal clipboard. I need to physically verify your official municipal authorization with the chief building engineer before allowing any unescorted access to our secure subterranean levels, the guard demanded suspiciously. He reached slowly for the heavy black radio clipped securely to his tactical vest. I knew absolute hesitation would instantly expose my federal disguise. I slapped my heavy palm violently against the polished marble reception desk, producing a sharp, echoing crack that commanded his immediate total attention. You do not possess the necessary clearance to delay a mandatory federal safety intervention tonight, I growled with unyielding, ferocious authority. If you touch that radio and waste one more minute of my valuable time, I will legally condemn this entire corporate tower. I will permanently evacuate all 40 floors right now, and I will personally ensure the Municipal Safety Board imposes a $50,000 fine for every single hour your building remains non-compliant. I stepped aggressively forward, forcing his large frame to yield an inch of physical territory. Call your chief engineer if you wish to lose your lucrative employment before midnight, I challenged him ruthlessly. The aggressive threat of massive corporate financial penalties completely paralyzed his trained defensive instincts. He swallowed nervously and slowly pulled his hand away from the black radio unit. He grabbed a temporary white access card from his desk drawer and swiped it against the glowing turnstile scanner. The thick glass barrier beeped and silently slid open to grant me immediate entry. I marched straight past him toward the service elevator bank, maintaining an aura of absolute furious impatience. I successfully penetrated the outer security shell entirely through sheer verbal intimidation today, right here. I rode the industrial service elevator deeply down into the concrete basement of the massive high-rise tower. The metal doors slid open to reveal a sterile cinder block corridor housing the primary electrical infrastructure. I bypassed the main boiler room entirely and navigated directly toward the central digital server hub. The heavy steel door required keycard authentication to enter, but the adjacent drywall paneling offered a significantly weaker structural vulnerability. I retrieved a compact oscillating saw from my deep jacket pocket. I sliced a clean square through the painted gypsum board hiding behind a large gray utility cabinet. I climbed smoothly through the narrow opening and dropped silently onto the raised flooring of the restricted server room. Racks of blinking black computer towers hummed continuously in the heavily air-conditioned space. I located the specific fiber optic junction box controlling the underground vault camera network. I pulled a specialized digital splicing tool from my thick canvas belt. My calloused hands remained perfectly steady despite the overwhelming pressure crushing my chest. I carefully stripped the protective blue casing from the primary video transmission line. I connected the thin glass fibers directly into the custom federal bypass relay provided by Special Agent Carter. The tiny black device intercepted the live video feed flowing from the highly secure safety deposit sector. It instantly injected a seamlessly looping 3-minute recording of a completely empty hallway back into the main security monitoring station upstairs. The guards sitting comfortably behind their glowing monitors would only see a quiet, undisturbed corridor. I successfully blinded the sophisticated digital eyes guarding Brent offshore money laundering evidence. I repacked my heavy tools and crawled back through the damaged drywall hole, leaving the server room entirely undetected and perfectly prepped for my final vault infiltration right down here tonight, safely alone immediately. I moved swiftly down the dimly lit concrete hallway toward the primary safety deposit sector. The massive circular steel vault door remained permanently propped open during business operating hours, exposing rows of polished metal lockboxes. I approached the secure section completely confident that the spliced camera feed shielded my physical presence from the upstairs surveillance team. I easily located Brent-designated security box numbered 407. I pulled the specialized federal decryption tool from my canvas pocket and plugged the electronic interface directly into the digital keypad. The sophisticated FBI override algorithm rapidly cycled through thousands of numeric combinations in mere seconds. A satisfying mechanical click echoed loudly from the heavy steel door. I pulled the metal drawer open and immediately spotted the original wet ink loan contract resting atop a massive stack of offshore banking ledgers. I carefully slid the crucial physical forgery inside my protective jacket, ensuring the fragile paper remained entirely undamaged. This single document contained the irrefutable evidence required to secure an immediate federal arrest warrant and permanently void the catastrophic real estate sale. I firmly shut the empty metal drawer, restoring the pristine appearance of the private box. My difficult mission was successfully accomplished. I turned around to exit the secure subterranean vault and raced back to Special Agent Carter. The massive 2-ton steel door suddenly groaned on its heavy titanium hinges and aggressively swung shut, sealing the exit frame completely. A harsh, blinding light illuminated the tight, enclosed space. My daughter Morgan stood perfectly still, blocking the only exit path. 2 massive armed corporate fixers flanked her side, pointing suppressed tactical pistols directly at my chest. Morgan glared at me with absolutely zero remorse in her cold, calculating eyes, preparing to completely destroy her own father tonight without any hesitation at all right now, immediately. Morgan extended her perfectly manicured hand and demanded I surrender the original wet ink loan contract immediately. Her 2 heavily armed corporate fixers stepped forward with their tactical pistols aimed directly at my chest. I did not resist her aggressive command or attempt to fight my way past the lethal weapons. I remained completely calm while staring into the cold eyes of the daughter I had sacrificed my entire life to raise. I reached slowly into my dark navy canvas jacket. The armed fixers tensed their shoulders, but I only withdrew my secure mobile phone. I tapped the glowing screen to access the encrypted audio file provided directly by the federal agents earlier this evening. I pressed the play button and turned the speaker volume to maximum capacity. Brent's frantic voice echoed loudly across the cold concrete walls of the underground vault corridor. "I need a single one-way ticket to the Cayman Islands departing at exactly 9 o'clock tonight," Brent demanded over the intercepted federal wiretap. "Do not include my wife on the flight manifest under any circumstances whatsoever. I am leaving Morgan behind to face the federal prosecutors alone. I assigned her as the primary signatory on all the fraudulent medical records and the illicit land transfer deeds. When the authorities raid the estate tomorrow morning, they will arrest her for masterminding the entire conspiracy to murder her grandfather. She will spend the rest of her natural life in a maximum security penitentiary while I safely escape the jurisdiction with the $5 million. I paused the audio recording and looked back at my daughter. The heavy silence in the subterranean hallway was absolutely deafening as the horrific truth finally crashed down upon her right now, today, immediately. She stood completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his betrayal. The vibrant color completely drained from Morgan's perfectly contoured face as the brutal reality of her husband's vicious manipulation set in. Her arrogant posture crumbled instantly. She staggered backward against the solid steel frame of the open vault door. She finally realized that the wealthy white venture capitalist she married had never truly viewed her as a respected equal business partner. Brent simply used her as a highly convenient disposable shield to securely access my father's immense generational wealth. He actively weaponized her blind ambition to orchestrate a massive offshore money laundering scheme while meticulously ensuring she absorbed the entire devastating legal fallout. She sacrificed her own family blood for a man who eagerly threw her to the federal wolves to save his own skin tonight. The thick tension in the underground corridor shifted violently. The lead corporate fixer standing to her right suddenly pressed his free hand against his black tactical earpiece. I watched his cold eyes dart rapidly between my face and my daughter's trembling form. Brent was monitoring the active situation from his secure remote location. The ruthless billionaire realized his deceptive plan was fully exposed and decided to tie up all the loose ends before fleeing to the airstrip. The heavily armed fixer nodded slowly to confirm the lethal instruction he just received through the encrypted radio channel. He completely ignored Morgan's previous command to secure the forged paperwork. "Eliminate them both right now," the lead guard ordered his partner with absolute chilling detachment. They simultaneously raised their suppressed tactical weapons and pointed the black steel barrels directly at our heads. Morgan shrieked in absolute sheer terror as the ruthless men she hired prepared to execute her in the basement of the central bank. I knew we possessed less than 2 seconds to survive today completely unharmed right now tonight. The armed corporate fixers locked their fingers firmly around the sensitive triggers of their suppressed tactical weapons. They fully intended to leave 2 bleeding corpses inside the subterranean bank corridor to ensure Brent successfully escaped the country without leaving any living witnesses behind. I did not stand still and wait to be executed by hired thugs. My decades of extensive experience working on large commercial construction sites gifted me with an intimate knowledge of building infrastructure. I noticed a massive red industrial fire extinguisher mounted securely to the concrete wall merely 2 feet away from my right shoulder. I also noticed the primary high-voltage electrical distribution panel situated directly behind the lead guard. I moved with a sudden, aggressive burst of raw physical power that completely defied my 70 years of age. I grabbed the heavy metal canister off its mounting bracket in one fluid motion and hurled it violently across the narrow hallway. The solid steel cylinder sailed through the air and smashed brutally into the exposed electrical panel. The catastrophic impact instantly crushed the sensitive breaker switches. A massive, blinding shower of bright blue and white electrical sparks aggressively erupted from the shattered metal box. The severe power surge immediately tripped the main basement circuit breakers. The deafening crack of the explosive short circuit echoed violently down the long corridor. The brilliant fluorescent lights illuminating the restricted vault sector died instantly. The entire subterranean level plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness in a fraction of a second. The sudden catastrophic blackout completely blinded the armed mercenaries right before they could fire their lethal weapons. I used the temporary chaotic confusion to launch my desperate escape plan. I grabbed the original wet ink forged document tightly against my chest and moved aggressively forward through the dark hallway right now immediately. I lunged forward through the absolute darkness and grabbed Morgan firmly by the collar of her expensive designer gown. She was completely paralyzed by pure paralyzing fear, unable to comprehend her husband's lethal betrayal. I ruthlessly dragged her stumbling body toward the heavy steel door of the emergency stairwell. Suppressed gunfire suddenly coughed loudly behind us. Bullets sparked violently against the concrete floor as the blinded mercenaries fired wildly into the black corridor, trying to execute us blindly. I shoved my terrified daughter into the stairwell and slammed the thick metal door shut to block the incoming projectiles. We raced frantically upward, climbing 40 steep flights of concrete stairs, while the angry armed fixers pursued us aggressively from below. Morgan gasped for air, her lungs burning as we finally reached the ground-level exit. I threw open the heavy red fire door that led directly into the bustling downtown street. I shoved her violently through the opening into the safe crowds of innocent pedestrians. She stumbled onto the wet sidewalk, completely protected by public visibility. I did not follow her out. I slammed the fire door shut to ensure the armed mercenaries would not unleash a deadly crossfire into the crowded civilian street tonight. I turned around and sprinted fiercely down the opposite hallway, breaking through the double doors leading into the vast underground parking garage. The frantic mercenaries followed my noisy footsteps, ignoring the public exit entirely. I raced across the cold, damp asphalt, hoping to reach the federal agents waiting discreetly on the perimeter. Bright, blinding halogen headlights suddenly flooded the dark parking structure. An enormous, heavily armored black SUV accelerated brutally toward my fragile body. I dove desperately behind a thick, structural concrete pillar, just as the massive vehicle violently smashed into the solid stone barrier, trapping me completely today. The blinding halogen headlights of the armored SUV pinned me against the cold concrete pillar. The heavy engine roared aggressively as the vehicle surged forward to crush the life out of me. Before the massive steel grille could make contact, the deafening wail of federal sirens completely shattered the tense silence of the underground parking garage. 4 heavily armored tactical vehicles swerved violently down the concrete ramp and entirely blocked the primary exit paths. Blue and red strobe lights violently illuminated the dark subterranean structure. Highly trained federal agents poured out of the vehicles with tactical rifles raised and aimed directly at the hostile targets. Brent realized his lethal execution plan was entirely compromised by the sudden massive federal intervention. He cowardly abandoned his 2 armed corporate fixers without a single ounce of hesitation. He violently slammed his armored SUV into reverse and aggressively smashed through a secondary security barrier located near the service exit. He sped wildly out into the downtown streets and successfully evaded the initial tactical net. The stranded corporate fixers instantly dropped their suppressed weapons onto the damp asphalt and surrendered to the swarming federal authorities. Special Agent Carter and Ian rushed out of the lead tactical unit to secure my position. I did not waste time checking myself for physical injuries. I reached deep inside my canvas jacket and pulled out the perfectly preserved original wet ink loan contract. I handed the crucial physical forgery directly to Ian. My lawyer gripped the fragile paper tightly and nodded with absolute grim satisfaction. We finally possessed the undeniable smoking gun required to legally dismantle the fraudulent offshore money laundering conspiracy completely. We successfully secured the vital evidence, but the true mastermind was currently speeding desperately through the city, completely unchecked right now tonight without any capture at all today. The federal surveillance teams immediately attempted to track the escaping armored vehicle through the complex downtown traffic grid, but they completely lost his visual signature near the industrial district. Brent knew his carefully constructed financial empire was actively burning to the ground right now. He was completely cornered and entirely out of time tonight. He rapidly shifted his strategy from a calculated corporate acquisition to a desperate, frantic liquidation. Carter received a highly classified intelligence update on his encrypted mobile terminal 30 minutes later. Brent utilized his remaining underworld connections to rapidly organize an illegal underground VIP auction at the prestigious Grand Plaza Luxury Hotel tonight. He successfully gathered a massive syndicate of ruthless international real estate developers and wealthy shadow investors into one heavily guarded grand ballroom. His terrifying new objective was brutally simple and incredibly dangerous. He intended to rapidly auction off the entire historic business district to the absolute highest bidder before his private flight departed at 9 o'clock. He demanded the final winning transaction be executed entirely in untraceable offshore cryptocurrency to avoid the impending federal asset freeze completely. The ruthless billionaire planned to trade the sacred legacy of our entire community for a massive digital cash payload he could easily carry onto his private jet tonight. If he successfully finalized this specific illicit auction and electronically transferred the hidden funds, he would comfortably escape the jurisdiction forever. He would leave 50 minority-owned businesses entirely at the cruel mercy of anonymous international developers, who would immediately bulldoze the historic properties without any hesitation at all. We needed to physically intercept this clandestine transaction before the final gavel fell tonight. We simply could not allow him to successfully sell our cherished history to shadow buyers and vanish completely into the dark night, totally unpunished today, forever, completely now. I reunited with my 89-year-old father inside the secure federal command center. Josiah embraced me tightly with absolute immense relief after learning I successfully survived the violent underground vault ambush. We quickly gathered around a large tactical map table with Ian and Special Agent Carter to formulate a precise, immediate strike plan. Carter initially suggested coordinating a standard tactical breach to simply arrest Brent directly inside the hotel lobby. Ian strongly rejected that conventional approach entirely. We cannot simply arrest him quietly and securely, Ian argued forcefully to the gathered federal agents. If you peacefully detain him right now, his powerful corporate lawyers will immediately spin the narrative. They will claim he was violently targeted by a rogue federal agency over a minor technical paperwork dispute. He will use his vast remaining wealth to bury the undeniable truth entirely. We need to publicly and utterly humiliate him in front of his wealthy, corrupt peers tonight. Josiah nodded in firm, absolute agreement with the sharp federal lawyer. We must completely destroy his prestigious elite reputation in front of those billionaire buyers, my father declared coldly. If we publicly expose his massive financial fraud directly during the illicit auction process, Every single shadow investor will instantly abandon his corrupt network forever out of sheer self-preservation. Carter agreed that financially destroying Brent influential criminal syndicate was the absolute best strategic maneuver right now. However, we faced a massive tactical obstacle immediately blocking our determined path. Brent completely anticipated aggressive federal interference. He deployed a massive, heavily armed private military contractor force to completely lock down the entire Grand Plaza Hotel tonight. The building front entrances and service doors were strictly barricaded by professional elite mercenaries, making conventional entry totally physically impossible right now today without a bloodbath immediately happening here tonight. The federal agents stared at the digital blueprints of the heavily fortified luxury hotel with absolute total frustration. The private military contractors had established an impenetrable defensive perimeter, completely sealing off every single modern access point. They did not know the deeply hidden historical infrastructure buried beneath the modern concrete foundation. I leaned over the tactical map and pointed a calloused finger directly at a blank gray section indicating solid bedrock beneath the hotel structure. "There is a forgotten subterranean passage running exactly under the grand ballroom right here," I stated with absolute unshakable confidence. During my early career as a structural engineer, I personally mapped a massive network of ancient Civil War-era sewer tunnels that the city completely abandoned a century ago. The modern developers never officially documented these massive brick catacombs when they poured the luxury hotel foundation. The private military mercenaries guarding the surface have absolutely zero knowledge of this ancient underground vulnerability tonight. Carter immediately approved my highly unconventional infiltration strategy. I led my elderly father into the dark, damp depths of the forgotten brick tunnels beneath the glowing city streets. Josiah walked with incredible resilient strength despite his 89 years of age and the freezing, stagnant water soaking our heavy boots. We navigated the winding, claustrophobic catacombs for 40 exhausting minutes using only a dim, tactical flashlight to guide our dangerous path. We finally reached a rusted iron maintenance ladder ascending directly toward the underside of the grand ballroom floor. We climbed slowly upward and positioned ourselves tightly within the narrow crawl space directly beneath an ornate brass ventilation grate. We held our breath entirely still. The heavy thud of combat boots echoed violently down through the metal slats. Armed mercenaries were aggressively patrolling the polished marble floor positioned exactly 1 inch directly above our exposed faces. The limited time for our silent observation had officially expired entirely. We needed to violently disrupt this illicit financial transaction before Brent dropped the heavy auction gavel and permanently finalized the devastating offshore transfer. I crawled carefully away from the ventilation grate and navigated deeper into the claustrophobic brick catacombs. My heavy boots splashed quietly through the freezing, stagnant water accumulating on the tunnel floor. I moved directly beneath the structural support columns holding up the massive grand stage of the opulent ballroom above us. I located the primary electrical junction box mounted securely against the cold, damp concrete foundation wall. Thick black power cables ran outward from the central conduit supplying the immense electrical current required to illuminate the extravagant chandeliers and power the sophisticated digital bidding systems. I reached down into my heavy canvas utility belt and retrieved a pair of massive industrial bolt cutters I had brought for this exact tactical maneuver. I positioned the sharp, heavy steel blades directly around the thickest primary power cable feeding the entire grand ballroom floor. I planted my boots firmly onto the slick bricks and squeezed the long metal handles with absolutely every single ounce of physical strength remaining in my tired 70-year-old arms. The heavy blades sliced aggressively through the thick rubber casing and violently severed the vital copper wires inside. A massive shower of bright blue electrical sparks erupted aggressively from the severed conduit, briefly blinding me in the dark tunnel. The brilliant golden light flooding through the iron grate above us died instantly in a single devastating fraction of a second. The entire luxury ballroom plunged immediately into total, absolute pitch-black darkness right now tonight. A massive wave of confused, terrifying panic erupted loudly from the wealthy crowd of elite shadow investors standing instantly here today. The bidding war paused momentarily as Brent raised his hands to command absolute silence from the wealthy audience. He adjusted his expensive microphone and completely shifted his aggressive auctioneer persona into a deeply calculated display of profound artificial grief. He dramatically lowered his head and produced a perfectly timed heavy sigh that echoed throughout the massive ballroom. "I stand before you tonight carrying an incredibly heavy burden of immense personal sorrow," Brent announced with a dangerously convincing tremor in his deceptive voice. "My beloved grandfather-in-law Josiah recently passed away, leaving our grieving family completely devastated by his sudden tragic departure. He pulled a crisp white handkerchief from his tuxedo pocket and wiped away absolutely invisible tears from his dry eyes. Josiah was a true visionary who dedicated his entire existence to building that historic neighborhood from nothing. Brent continued smoothly weaving his toxic lies into a beautiful corporate narrative. I promised my deeply mourning wife Morgan that I would personally ensure his monumental legacy survives this terrible transition. We are transferring the property rights tonight specifically to guarantee this land is aggressively modernized and protected by true industry leaders like yourselves. The shadow investors applauded loudly, completely fooled by his masterful performance of fake family devotion. I gripped the rusted iron bars of the ventilation grate, my knuckles turning completely white with sheer, unrestrained fury. He was using the fabricated death of the man standing directly beside me to extract maximum sympathy and highly inflated monetary bids from the ruthless crowd. He had the absolute audacity to claim he was honoring my father while actively selling our heritage to industrial waste corporations. I looked at Josiah standing quietly in the dark tunnel. My father did not show any anger at all right now while listening to these horrific lies spoken today. The time for silent observation had officially expired. We needed to violently disrupt this illicit financial transaction before Brent dropped the heavy auction gavel and permanently finalized the devastating offshore transfer. I crawled carefully away from the ventilation grate and navigated deeper into the claustrophobic brick catacombs. My heavy boots splashed quietly through the freezing, stagnant water accumulating on the tunnel floor. I moved directly beneath the structural support columns holding up the massive grand stage of the opulent ballroom above us. I located the primary electrical junction box mounted securely against the cold, damp concrete foundation wall. Thick black power cables ran outward from the central conduit supplying the immense electrical current required to illuminate the extravagant chandeliers and power the sophisticated digital bidding systems. I reached down into my heavy canvas utility belt and retrieved a pair of massive industrial bolt cutters I had brought for this exact tactical maneuver. I positioned the sharp, heavy steel blades directly around the thickest primary power cable feeding the entire grand ballroom floor. I planted my boots firmly onto the slick bricks and squeezed the long metal handles with absolutely every single ounce of physical strength remaining in my tired 70-year-old arms. The heavy blades sliced aggressively through the thick rubber casing and violently severed the vital copper wires inside. A massive shower of bright blue electrical sparks erupted aggressively from the severed conduit, briefly blinding me in the dark tunnel. The brilliant golden light flooding through the iron grate above us died instantly in a single devastating fraction of a second. The entire luxury ballroom plunged immediately into total, absolute pitch-black darkness right now tonight. A massive wave of confused, terrifying panic erupted loudly from the wealthy crowd of elite shadow investors standing instantly here today. The absolute sudden darkness severely terrified the wealthy elite investors who were previously bidding millions of dollars to destroy our community. Shouts of sheer aggressive panic echoed wildly across the expansive room as ruthless corporate executives blindly stumbled over expensive cocktail tables attempting to locate the exit doors. The heavy chaos reigned supreme for exactly 10 agonizingly long seconds before the automatic hotel safety grid officially engaged. The dull crimson glow of the emergency backup lights flickered aggressively to life, casting long, terrifying red shadows across the luxurious marble floor. The dim, bloody illumination barely restored order, but it provided enough visibility to see the massive mahogany podium standing near the center of the grand stage. The frightened crowd murmured frantically while heavily armed private military contractors raised their tactical flashlights searching for the exact source of the sudden electrical failure. The sharp, violent crack of heavy polished wood suddenly completely shattered the tense, nervous murmurs. The auctioneer heavy wooden gavel slammed down brutally hard directly against the polished wooden sounding block. The deafening, aggressive strike echoed loudly like a gunshot, demanding absolute total submission from the entire room. The terrified crowd of wealthy shadow investors instantly fell entirely dead silent. Every single eye in the opulent ballroom locked directly onto the dimly lit main stage. Brent was no longer standing aggressively behind the wooden microphone stand. He was currently cowering near the velvet stage curtains, staring forward in absolute, sheer, unadulterated, paralyzing horror. The man standing powerfully at the dark mahogany podium gripping the heavy wooden gavel was not the ruthless white venture capitalist. It was my 89-year-old father, Josiah, looking fiercely determined right now tonight. The legally dead man officially resurrected to confront the thieves who tried to steal his entire life legacy today right here completely immediately. The deafening crack of the heavy wooden auction gavel completely shattered the tense, nervous murmurs echoing across the opulent ballroom tonight. Brent violently stumbled backward away from the polished mahogany podium as if he had been physically struck by a massive unseen force. The vibrant color instantly drained from his perfectly manicured face, leaving his skin the color of pale white ash. He stared in absolute paralyzing horror at the tall, imposing figure standing confidently under the dim crimson glow of the emergency backup lights. "You are dead!" Brent shrieked hysterically. His voice cracked with sheer, unadulterated terror as his meticulously constructed corporate reality rapidly crumbled around him. "You are legally dead and buried right now." My 89-year-old father, Josiah, stood perfectly still on the elevated grand stage. He adjusted his reading glasses with absolute mechanical calmness and stared down at the wealthy white venture capitalist who had ruthlessly attempted to murder him for real estate. Josiah offered a cold, terrifyingly serene smile that sent violent shivers down the spines of the elite shadow investors watching the dramatic confrontation. "The rumors of my permanent demise have been greatly exaggerated tonight, Brent," my father stated with a deep, booming voice that commanded total, absolute authority across the massive room today. "I survived the lethal poison your ambitious wife slipped into my morning coffee last week. I survived the forged medical certificates you aggressively purchased from corrupt physicians to legally erase my entire existence. I am standing right here today, fully alive, breathing, and ready to completely dismantle your entire criminal empire forever." The wealthy developers gasped loudly in collective shock as the impossible truth finally paralyzed the entire room. Brent backed away frantically, bumping heavily against the velvet stage curtains, completely trapped in a severe nightmare of his own making tonight. Josiah firmly gripped the heavy wooden edges of the mahogany podium and leaned aggressively into the primary stage microphone. His powerful voice amplified across the massive dark room, completely dominating the chaotic murmurs of the terrified audience. "Listen to me very carefully, you ruthless corporate vultures," my father warned them with icy precision. "Every single property deed presented during this illicit auction tonight is a completely fabricated, fraudulent forgery. I am the sole authentic legal owner of the historic business district, and I have never authorized any transfer of my land to this pathetic thief. The entire multi-million-dollar real estate sale you were actively participating in mere minutes ago is an absolutely illegal criminal enterprise designed solely to launder stolen money offshore." The shadow investors exchanged horrified, panicked glances as the severe reality of their precarious legal situation instantly materialized. "You are currently standing inside an active federal crime scene tonight," Josiah continued, mercilessly tightening the psychological noose around the wealthy crowd. "The Federal Bureau of Investigation has already successfully secured the original wet ink forged loan documents from the central bank underground vault today. Their heavily armed tactical strike teams are currently securing the outer perimeter of this exact hotel structure right now. I highly suggest you lower those expensive bidding paddles immediately today. Any single developer or shadow investor who actively wires 1 single cent of digital currency to Brent offshore accounts tonight will be aggressively indicted for massive federal money laundering tomorrow morning. You will permanently lose your entire corporate empires, and you will spend the rest of your miserable natural lives rotting inside a maximum security federal penitentiary." The sheer absolute terror of facing devastating federal prosecution instantly crushed the greedy corporate ambitions of every single wealthy buyer standing trapped inside the opulent ballroom today right now. The devastating threat of brutal federal prosecution completely shattered the fragile criminal alliance binding the elite shadow investors together tonight. The wealthy corporate executives instantly prioritized their own absolute self-preservation over any lucrative real estate acquisition. A heavy wooden bidding paddle dropped violently onto the polished marble floor. Dozens more followed immediately as the terrified audience forcefully rejected Brent and his incredibly toxic financial scheme. The opulent ballroom instantly erupted into sheer chaotic madness as the greedy billionaires aggressively stampeded toward the massive wooden exit doors. Highly paid corporate lawyers shouted frantic instructions to their panicked wealthy clients, urging them to flee the active crime scene immediately to avoid mass federal arrest. They shoved each other ruthlessly aside, completely abandoning their expensive champagne flutes and designer suit jackets in their desperate rush to escape the impending tactical raid. The private military contractors hired by Brent observed the massive exodus and quickly realized the catastrophic legal implications of remaining on the payroll. The elite guards instantly lowered their suppressed tactical weapons and rapidly joined the frantic, fleeing crowd, completely abandoning their primary client to face the brutal federal wrath entirely alone. Brent stood helplessly near the velvet curtains, watching his entire illicit financial empire collapse into absolute ashes right before his terrified eyes. His massive, carefully constructed offshore money laundering syndicate dissolved entirely in less than 60 chaotic seconds tonight. The deafening roar of the stampeding crowd eventually faded away, leaving the massive grand ballroom incredibly silent and beautifully empty. Only a vast sea of discarded bidding paddles and shattered crystal glasses remained on the floor. Brent was now completely isolated without his heavily armed security detail or his wealthy, corrupt buyers tonight, forever standing alone inside the dark room, completely ruined today, awaiting his inevitable federal arrest right now, immediately today. Brent stared wildly at the empty, luxurious ballroom, realizing his meticulously crafted financial empire was completely annihilated forever. His lucrative private jet to the Cayman Islands would depart without him tonight, leaving him utterly trapped inside an active federal dragnet. He had aggressively murdered innocent people and deeply betrayed his own wife simply to acquire this monumental wealth. He absolutely refused to surrender his freedom and accept a permanent, miserable existence behind thick steel prison bars. The sheer aggressive desperation of a cornered predator completely overtook his fragile sanity right now. Brent violently shoved his shaking hand deep inside his expensive tailored tuxedo jacket. He aggressively withdrew a heavy concealed black tactical handgun and viciously disengaged the metal safety mechanism with a loud, sharp click. He marched furiously toward the mahogany podium and aimed the lethal steel barrel directly at Josiah's chest. His bloodshot eyes bulged with pure, uncontrolled psychotic rage under the dim crimson emergency lights illuminating the grand stage. "You ruined absolutely everything, you miserable old ghost," Brent screamed hysterically, waving the loaded weapon aggressively at my elderly father. "I am not spending the rest of my natural life rotting inside a federal cage because you refuse to stay buried." Brent reached into his inner pocket with his free hand and pulled out a crumpled set of fraudulent transfer documents. He forcefully slammed the thick paper stack onto the wooden podium directly in front of Josiah. "Sign these absolute transfer deeds right now and legally authorize the offshore transaction immediately," Brent roared with pure lethal intent tonight. "If you refuse to sign away your community estate this exact second, I will happily execute you right here on this stage and permanently end your miserable, pathetic life tonight without hesitation, entirely, directly, right now, today, absolutely, forever, without delay, right now, today." Brent gripped the heavy black handgun with white knuckles. He screamed his desperate ultimatum across the empty ballroom, but my 89-year-old father did not flinch. Josiah stood perfectly still behind the polished mahogany podium. He stared down the lethal steel barrel with absolute, unshakable defiance. He had survived the brutal segregation of the Deep South and built a thriving community empire from absolutely nothing. A desperate, cowardly venture capitalist waving a stolen weapon could never terrify a man forged in real fire. I stepped out from the heavy red velvet curtains hiding the backstage utility corridor. I walked calmly across the polished wooden floorboards of the grand stage. I did not raise my hands or show any fear. I reached inside my heavy canvas jacket and pulled out the crisp white folder containing the original wet ink loan contract. I tossed the thick stack of forged legal papers directly onto the floor. The documents slid across the smooth stage and stopped mere inches from his expensive leather shoes. "You completely lost this war today," I stated with a cold, crushing finality. "The massive offshore money laundering scheme is entirely finished right now. Your elite shadow investors completely abandoned you, and your private military contractors surrendered to the federal authorities outside this building. You have absolutely zero leverage left to exploit tonight." Brent stared at the scattered forged documents lying on the stage. His breathing grew incredibly shallow and erratic as the severe reality of his total financial destruction paralyzed his mind. He tightened his grip on the weapon and aimed it directly at my chest. He prepared to squeeze the sensitive metal trigger to execute us both in a final act of pure, violent desperation before escaping tonight without delay, right here and absolutely, completely, very soon indeed, today. Before his trembling finger could successfully compress the heavy steel trigger mechanism, a brilliant array of solid crimson light aggressively flooded the grand stage. 20 distinct bright red laser sights pierced the dark, oppressive shadows of the opulent ballroom simultaneously. The highly concentrated beams of tactical light violently painted the center of his expensive tailored tuxedo jacket. The lethal glowing dots tracked his every single erratic movement with absolute, terrifying mechanical precision. He froze completely in sheer, unadulterated panic as the undeniable threat of imminent death shattered his violent resolve. The massive double oak doors at the main ballroom entrance exploded inward with a deafening, catastrophic crash. Heavy glass shattered fiercely across the polished marble floor. Dozens of heavily armored federal tactical agents flooded into the massive room from every conceivable entry point. They breached the secondary service corridors and the elevated balcony seating areas in perfect synchronized tactical formation. The harsh, blinding glare of high-intensity weapon-mounted flashlights aggressively cut through the dim emergency illumination. Drop the firearm immediately and interlock your fingers securely behind your head. An invisible federal commander roared through an incredibly loud electronic bullhorn. You are entirely surrounded by federal authorities right now. If you move the weapon even a single fraction of an inch, we will neutralize you with extreme terminal prejudice today. The deafening echo of racking rifle bolts filled the massive empty space. The elite sniper teams positioned on the upper mezzanine possessed clear, unobstructed firing lanes directly targeting his skull. He realized his pathetic, desperate gamble had utterly failed. There was absolutely no secret escape route or high-priced corporate legal defense team that could save him from the overwhelming federal firepower currently locking him down entirely right now in this very room today, definitively forever, right here, absolutely, totally, immediately now today. The heavy black handgun slipped from his trembling fingers and clattered loudly against the polished wooden floorboards of the grand stage. Brent instantly collapsed onto his custom-tailored knees, completely shattered by the sheer, overwhelming magnitude of his absolute failure. His arrogant, ruthless billionaire persona evaporated entirely in a single devastating fraction of a second. The man who had mercilessly attempted to bulldoze our sacred community and murder my elderly father was now visibly shaking like a terrified child. Tears streamed rapidly down his pale face, ruining his meticulously groomed appearance. He aggressively raised his empty hands high into the air to prove his total submission to the advancing federal tactical units. "Please do not shoot me," he sobbed hysterically while staring at the dozens of laser sights dancing violently across his chest. "I surrender completely right now." He immediately began frantically betraying the very woman he had sworn to protect. "It was not my idea," he shrieked desperately into the dark, empty ballroom, hoping the federal agents would show him unwarranted mercy. Morgan orchestrated the entire massive conspiracy from the very beginning. My wife manipulated the corrupt doctors at the care facility to secure the fraudulent death certificate. She actively ordered her grandfather to be lethally poisoned last week. I was just a completely helpless pawn trapped inside her malicious corporate takeover scheme. He enthusiastically sold out his own spouse without a single ounce of hesitation or lingering regret. His cowardly, desperate lies echoed repulsively through the silent room, cementing his legacy as a pathetic, treacherous snake. I watched him weeping miserably on the floor, feeling absolutely zero pity for the ruthless monster who had tried to erase my family from existence forever tonight, right here, completely definitively witnessing his ultimate downfall happening right before my very eyes today, right now. A massive, heavily armored federal agent sprinted aggressively across the grand stage and violently tackled the weeping billionaire. The brutal physical impact drove Brent face first into the hard wooden floorboards, completely silencing his hysterical, desperate shouting instantly. The tactical operator forcefully pinned the corrupt venture capitalist beneath his heavy combat boots, pressing a steel knee directly into his spine. He yanked Brent's arms aggressively backward and snapped a pair of cold, heavy metal handcuffs tightly around his expensive, tailored wrists. "You are officially under arrest for massive federal wire fraud conspiracy to commit murder and international money laundering," the agent roared fiercely into his ear. Brent whimpered miserably against the polished wood, completely stripped of his formidable elite power and wealthy corporate arrogance forever. The heavy brass doors at the far end of the dark, opulent ballroom slowly groaned open, breaking the absolute deafening silence. My daughter Morgan walked hesitantly into the massive empty space. Her stunning emerald green designer gown was severely torn and covered entirely in gray industrial dust from her frantic escape through the dangerous downtown parking garage earlier tonight. She stood perfectly still near the velvet entrance, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the horrific scene unfolding directly ahead of her. She watched in absolute, unadulterated shock as her own husband desperately screamed her name, attempting to aggressively trade her permanent freedom to secure a lighter federal prison sentence for himself. She witnessed the ruthless man she chose over her own flesh and blood enthusiastically throw her directly under the crushing wheels of federal justice today. Her massive, incredibly lucrative corporate empire officially dissolved into absolute worthless ashes right before her terrified eyes. She was now entirely alone, facing total, absolute, devastating destruction without any hope of redemption or escape right now today, completely, immediately, forever now. Morgan stepped slowly onto the shattered crystal coating the polished marble floor of the grand ballroom. Her ruined emerald green designer gown dragged heavily through the absolute wreckage of her husband-destroyed corporate empire. She looked at Brent groveling pathetically beneath the heavy boots of the federal tactical agents. The sheer reality of her massive, inescapable legal predicament finally crushed her arrogant facade completely. She collapsed violently onto her bare knees right on top of the jagged broken glass. She ignored the sharp physical pain entirely. She raised her trembling hands toward my 89-year-old father and me. She began sobbing with a fierce, desperate intensity that echoed loudly across the massive empty room today. "Dad, please, you have to listen to me," Morgan wailed miserably while tears rapidly ruined her expensive, meticulously applied makeup. "I never actually wanted any of this terrible violence to happen to our family tonight." Brent manipulated my mind constantly. He convinced me that the crushing pressure of modern corporate greed required us to make incredibly difficult financial decisions to survive in this ruthless city. He promised me we were just securing our inevitable generational wealth early. She aggressively attempted to shift the entire burden of her horrific guilt onto the cowardly man currently pinned to the floorboards. "Grandpa, I am so deeply sorry for everything I did to you at the medical clinic," she cried out, looking directly at Josiah, perfectly calm face. "I was completely blinded by the overwhelming toxic ambition of the elite corporate world. I am still your little girl. Please tell these federal agents to let me go home with you right now, tonight, immediately. We can fix this massive mistake together as a family today, completely right now, forever. I beg you, Father, save me from this nightmare, please." I stared down at my weeping daughter kneeling helplessly amidst the destroyed grandeur of the opulent ballroom. My rigid posture did not waver or soften in the slightest degree while I observed her pathetic display of highly calculated sorrow. I vividly remembered her sharply threatening me with total destitution outside my ground floor annex just a few terrifying days ago. I clearly recalled the terrifying image of her standing entirely motionless while corrupt medical orderlies aggressively dragged my 70-year-old body into a freezing, sterile isolation cell. She had actively conspired to inject me with highly dangerous chemical sedatives designed to permanently erase my conscious mind and silence my vital testimony forever. Above all those horrific transgressions, I remembered the absolutely undeniable medical evidence confirming she personally slipped lethal poison into my 89-year-old father's morning coffee. She had cold-heartedly orchestrated the brutal execution of her own grandfather to rapidly accelerate a fraudulent real estate transaction for her deeply indebted husband. The sheer, overwhelming magnitude of her prolonged malicious deception completely eradicated any remaining trace of paternal sympathy within my heavy heart tonight. I did not feel a single ounce of burning rage or aggressive fury toward her right now. I experienced nothing but a profoundly vast, hollow emptiness expanding endlessly throughout my entire tired soul today. The bright, ambitious young woman I had proudly raised and fiercely protected for 4 difficult decades simply no longer existed in reality. The sobbing individual groveling on the sharp broken glass below my heavy work boots was an absolute total stranger. She was a deeply corrupted corporate entity wearing the familiar face of my only beloved child. I took a slow, deep breath and prepared to deliver the absolute final, devastating blow to her completely shattered, fragile reality today, definitively, right now, entirely. "Family is absolutely not an excuse for attempted murder, Morgan," I stated with an incredibly cold and brutal clarity that echoed forcefully across the silent ballroom. My powerful voice did not waver or crack despite the immense emotional gravity crushing my exhausted shoulders tonight. "You eagerly watched your own grandfather fighting for his very life inside a hospital bed, and you felt absolutely nothing but sheer greedy impatience. You aggressively weaponized your privileged corporate education to meticulously construct a massive, lethal fraud against the very same men who fed and clothed you." Morgan cried out in agonizing pain and reached desperately toward my heavy boots, attempting to physically grab my ankles in sheer panic. I smoothly stepped backward, ensuring her manicured hands grasped nothing but the cold, broken crystal scattered across the polished floorboards. "A father unconditional love guarantees that I will always carry the beautiful memories of the innocent little girl you once were," I explained firmly while maintaining unbroken eye contact with my weeping child today. "However, genuine forgiveness must be actively earned through honest repentance, and you permanently crossed the absolute line of no return the exact second you purchased that deadly chemical poison last week. You deliberately traded our sacred historic community legacy for a luxurious offshore bank account, hoping to comfortably abandon us to a miserable fate. You made an incredibly calculated, ruthless choice to completely destroy our entire bloodline for temporary financial gain. I cannot shield you from the severe federal consequences of your incredibly malicious actions tonight. You must fully absorb the total devastating impact of the horrific crimes you willfully committed against your own family." Josiah stood silently on the elevated grand stage, solemnly nodding his gray head in complete, absolute agreement with my final, uncompromising parental judgment right now, today, forever, firmly, completely. A stern female federal agent wearing a dark tactical jacket stepped swiftly forward through the shattered glass of the ruined ballroom. She grasped my weeping daughter firmly by her trembling shoulder and forcefully hauled her up from the damaged floorboards. Morgan screamed hysterically as the elite federal operator aggressively twisted her manicured hands tightly behind her designer gown. The harsh, unmistakable, metallic clack of heavy steel handcuffs instantly echoed across the vast, empty hall, completely sealing her horrific fate. "You have the absolute right to remain entirely silent," the female agent recited with a cold professional detachment that offered zero comfort. "Anything you say can and will be aggressively used against you in a federal court of law. You are officially under arrest tonight for international wire fraud, massive corporate conspiracy, and the premeditated attempted murder of Josiah." Morgan continued to sob violently, begging for my immediate intervention while the arresting officer systematically searched her pockets for concealed weapons or hidden digital drives. Brent watched his wife being brutally shackled from his position on the floor, offering a pathetic, miserable whimper as his own federal escorts dragged him ruthlessly toward the main exit doors. I did not offer any final comforting words or shed a single sympathetic tear for the corrupt criminals currently being hauled away to maximum security holding cells. I simply turned my heavy back on the chaotic scene and began walking slowly toward the elevated stage to rejoin my 89-year-old father. The piercing, agonizing cries of my only child gradually faded into the chaotic background noise of blaring police sirens and shouting tactical commanders outside. I walked decisively away from the devastating wreckage, completely leaving my treacherous daughter trapped securely in the unyielding iron grip of federal justice tonight to await her final inevitable punishment tomorrow morning. Heavy armored federal transport vans idled aggressively outside the shattered glass doors of the Grand Hotel ballroom. Heavily armed tactical agents ruthlessly hauled Brent out of the opulent building and violently shoved him into the back of a secure black vehicle. He wept loudly like a broken child, completely stripped of his arrogant corporate armor. Another squad of stern federal operators firmly escorted my weeping daughter Morgan out through the same exit. They deliberately placed her into an entirely separate transport van, ensuring the treacherous couple could not communicate or coordinate any further malicious lies. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a deafening metallic thud that permanently severed their corrupt alliance. Ian walked slowly across the ruined marble floor and stood directly beside me. My trusted lawyer placed a heavy, comforting hand firmly onto my exhausted shoulder. "We finally did it," Byron, Ian stated with a profound sense of absolute professional relief. "The long, brutal nightmare is officially over tonight." Ian pulled his glowing mobile tablet from his dark suit jacket and displayed a highly classified federal communication channel. "A federal magistrate judge just signed a massive comprehensive asset freeze order," Ian explained while pointing at the scrolling digital text. "Every single offshore bank account and domestic corporate holding attached to Brent is now completely locked down worldwide. The $5 million he attempted to steal is perfectly secured and rapidly returning to the community trust fund. He cannot access a single cent to hire elite defense attorneys or bribe any corrupt officials." I watched the flashing red and blue strobe lights gradually fade into the dark city streets. The immediate physical threat was completely neutralized tonight, but the immense bureaucratic cleanup process was only just beginning right now for us today, perfectly safely. The brilliant morning sun broke boldly across the eastern horizon, completely banishing the long, terrible darkness. Special Agent Carter officially issued a massive, comprehensive press release directly from the regional federal headquarters. The incredibly detailed public statement meticulously cleared my damaged name and entirely exonerated me from the vicious psychiatric accusations Morgan falsely broadcasted online. The devastating public narrative instantly shifted to expose the massive corporate conspiracy against our historic community. The county registry office opened at 8 o'clock sharp. A senior federal judge ordered the municipal clerks to permanently expunge Josiah forged death certificate from every single government database. My 89-year-old father officially regained his legal living status and completely reclaimed absolute executive control over his vast commercial real estate empire today. The monumental legal victory triggered a massive, powerful chain reaction throughout the local city government. The municipal zoning board convened a rapid emergency session immediately following the explosive federal press conference. The terrified city council members scrambled aggressively to distance themselves entirely from Brent highly toxic industrial waste syndicate. They officially and permanently revoked every single demolition permit assigned to our beloved historic estate. The massive yellow bulldozers were legally banished from the neighborhood forever. The greedy developers who shamelessly bid on our heritage mere hours ago were now actively cooperating with federal prosecutors to avoid severe money laundering indictments. We successfully rescued 50 independent minority-owned businesses from absolute total annihilation this morning. I stood proudly inside Ian Bright's busy law office reading the incredibly beautiful legal documents verifying our complete absolute victory. The crushing, oppressive weight that had suffocated my exhausted chest for several grueling days completely evaporated right now. The pristine air felt incredibly refreshing as truth and justice fiercely dismantled the treacherous lies immediately today, right here, perfectly forever, all together, finally now. The fierce, swift hammer of federal justice did not stop at my treacherous son-in-law. Dr. Felix Croft recognized the catastrophic failure of the massive offshore conspiracy early this morning. The corrupt psychiatrist desperately packed a single leather suitcase filled entirely with hidden illicit cash and attempted to flee the country. He aggressively navigated the crowded international airport terminal, hoping to board a direct flight to a remote non-extradition territory. He severely underestimated the ruthless efficiency of the active federal task force hunting him down. A heavily armed squad of elite United States Marshals aggressively intercepted the disgraced physician directly outside his designated departure gate. They violently threw him onto the polished terminal floor and firmly snapped heavy steel handcuffs around his wrists in front of hundreds of shocked travelers. His cowardly attempt to escape total accountability failed absolutely completely. The devastating ripple effect of his highly publicized public arrest instantly destroyed his entire medical empire. The state medical board convened an emergency investigative hearing this afternoon. They aggressively stripped Dr. Croft of his professional license and permanently banned him from practicing medicine anywhere in the country. A massive raid orchestrated by state health inspectors completely dismantled the entire fraudulent medical network operating covertly inside the Silver Pines luxury elder care facility. Dozens of highly corrupt staff members were aggressively detained for actively participating in the systematic illegal drugging and massive financial extortion of vulnerable senior citizens. The horrific institution that brutally attempted to execute my beloved father was successfully eradicated from our city forever. We completely neutralized every single malicious actor who eagerly conspired to destroy our precious family legacy. The absolute safety of our entire beautiful community was finally guaranteed permanently today, right now, without any doubt at all, right here, perfectly, immediately now, today, entirely, completely, forever. Several agonizingly long weeks rapidly passed as the immense federal legal machinery forcefully ground the guilty conspirators into absolute dust. The highly publicized criminal trial concluded swiftly because our acquired physical evidence was entirely irrefutable. A stern federal judge glared down from the elevated wooden bench and delivered the final crushing verdicts without a single ounce of mercy. Brent was aggressively sentenced to 30 consecutive years inside a maximum security penitentiary without any possibility of early parole. His vast stolen corporate empire was entirely liquidated to perfectly restitute every single victim he viciously defrauded. My own daughter Morgan stood completely trembling before the cold magistrate. She received a devastating mandatory sentence of 15 grueling years for her active malicious role in the massive medical conspiracy and attempted murder. I sat silently in the front row of the crowded courtroom alongside Ian and Josiah, watching the heavy iron doors of justice firmly slam shut on her entire future. I felt no joyous triumph observing my only child being hauled away in heavy metal shackles today. I only felt the quiet, somber realization that actions generate permanent, inescapable consequences. The brutal legal war was finally won completely, but the harsh physical reality of the terrifying conflict remained clearly visible. I drove my vintage truck back to the historic business district later that quiet afternoon. I stepped out onto the damp asphalt and stood silently before the brutally crushed wrought iron gates of our beautiful property. The massive yellow bulldozers had aggressively, severely damaged the ancient cobblestone entrance before I bravely stopped their violent advance. The ruthless corporate predators were entirely vanquished, but the heavy, immense task of physically rebuilding the severe, shattered destruction they aggressively left behind rested entirely upon my tired old shoulders alone right now, perfectly tonight, forever, exactly, completely, immediately, today, now. I spent the entire following month physically repairing the severe damage inflicted upon my ground floor annex. The violent mercenary raid had left deep, ugly scars across the very foundation of the home I built with my own two hands. I did not hire any outside contractors to fix the devastation. I needed the grueling physical labor to properly channel the lingering adrenaline remaining from our massive legal war. I started by hauling away the heavy broken furniture and shattered drywall left behind by Brent's ruthless security team. I cleared out every single piece of debris, throwing it all into a massive steel dumpster parked in the driveway. I spent 3 exhaustive days meticulously sanding down the gouged plaster before applying thick, fresh coats of bright white paint to the ruined walls. The familiar smell of the wet paint brought a deep, comforting sense of permanent renewal to the quiet space. I purchased a reinforced, solid steel deadbolt from the local hardware store to replace the brass lock the mercenaries had completely shattered during their initial aggressive breach. I installed the heavy metal mechanism using my old reliable tools, ensuring the heavy oak door would never yield to another hostile force again. My ruined knees ached fiercely with every single movement, but I pushed through the intense physical pain with absolute sheer determination. The strenuous daily routine allowed my tired 70-year-old mind to slowly process the sheer magnitude of the horrific betrayal we just survived. Every single nail I drove into the wood felt like a definitive, profound victory over the corrupt corporate predators who tried to erase us. I successfully transformed the violent wreckage back into a beautiful sanctuary of absolute quiet peace today, right here, completely restoring the structural integrity of my personal life right now, perfectly, forever, immediately, now, securely, and entirely. I was sweeping the final layer of fine plaster dust off the front porch when my oldest neighbor walked across the restored cobblestone driveway. He had operated the small neighborhood grocery store for over 30 years. He carried a fresh box of groceries as a welcoming gift for my father and me. He set the heavy cardboard box down on the wooden steps with a deep, sympathetic sigh. He hesitated for a long moment before asking the painful question that had been circulating silently throughout our entire community. He looked into my eyes and softly asked if it physically hurt my heart to know my only child was currently sitting inside a maximum security federal penitentiary. I did not flinch or look away from his concerned gaze. I leaned the wooden broom handle against the freshly painted exterior wall and looked out over the 50 thriving minority-owned businesses operating peacefully across our land. I thought about the horrific image of Morgan actively ordering armed guards to shoot me in the central bank basement. I remembered the absolute terror of discovering she had personally poisoned my elderly father just to secure a massive offshore loan. "You have to amputate the rot to save the tree," I answered calmly with absolute unshakable conviction. "I protected my roots today." The neighbor nodded slowly, fully understanding the immense emotional gravity of my clear statement. He realized I had not simply lost a daughter during this massive legal war. I had surgically removed a deadly toxic infection that deeply threatened to completely destroy everything we cherished. I shook his hand warmly and thanked him for the generous groceries. I carried the heavy box inside, feeling absolutely zero regret for allowing the ruthless federal justice system to permanently consume the traitorous woman who completely destroyed her own family. I walked into the bright, sunlit kitchen where Ian was already waiting at the large oak dining table with a thick stack of certified legal documents. My 89-year-old father, Josiah, sat perfectly upright in his favorite leather chair, reviewing the intricate paperwork with absolute intense focus. Josiah was officially transferring full executive control of the massive historic business collective directly into my name today. He calmly picked up his heavy brass fountain pen and firmly signed the very bottom line of the complex master deed, completely finalizing the massive transfer of power. "We are not just changing the names on these specific commercial property titles today," Ian stated with total professional satisfaction while stamping the documents with his official notary seal. "We have successfully established an incredibly aggressive ironclad generational trust fund designed specifically to shield this entire estate from any hostile corporate interference forever. The new foundational bylaws strictly mandated that the sprawling commercial land could absolutely never be sold, leveraged, or utilized as financial collateral by any single individual under any circumstances whatsoever. If a greedy developer or corrupt relative ever attempted to covertly break the strict preservation clauses, the entire collective property would instantly automatically donate itself to a prestigious federal civil rights museum. We systematically eradicated every single legal loophole that Brent had maliciously exploited to orchestrate his massive fraudulent loan." My father handed me the finalized master folder with a deeply proud, serene smile resting on his weathered face. I grasped the heavy paper stack, feeling the immense, profound weight of our hard-fought heritage resting securely in my hands. The incredibly treacherous, greedy corporate entities could absolutely never legally target our beloved sacred community land ever again, right now, perfectly today, ensuring our total absolute safety, completely, forever, immediately, now, securely, and entirely. 6 completely peaceful months rapidly passed since the incredibly dramatic federal courtroom sentencing permanently removed those dangerous corporate predators from our quiet lives. The sprawling historic business district was beautifully thriving exactly as my father Josiah had originally intended over 50 years ago. The fresh infusion of fully restored capital allowed 3 brand new minority-owned enterprises to successfully open their doors along the beautifully repaved cobblestone avenue last week. Our vibrant community had absolutely never been stronger or more financially resilient than it was right now today. The deep, painful wounds inflicted by my daughter Morgan's horrific betrayal were slowly beginning to fade into the distant background of my busy daily routine. I spent my days happily supervising minor structural repairs across the vast estate and my relaxing evenings enjoying quiet dinners with my father on the front porch. The terrifying, overwhelming anxiety that once dominated my every single waking moment had completely evaporated, leaving behind a profound, unshakable sense of permanent, absolute tranquility. I was deeply asleep in my comfortable bed when the glowing red digital numbers on my bedside alarm clock silently rolled over to display exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. A sudden, incredibly harsh electronic tone violently shattered the peaceful quiet of the dark bedroom. My cellular phone began ringing loudly on the wooden nightstand, aggressively vibrating against the polished surface. The sudden shrill noise perfectly echoed the exact terrible moment this entire massive nightmare had originally began half a year ago. I opened my tired eyes and stared intensely at the brightly illuminated screen flashing brightly in the pitch-black room. A strange, icy chill instantly traveled down my spine as I reached out my calloused hand to answer the incoming call, right now, immediately, today, completing the cycle forever, entirely, now, perfectly, securely, and completely. I reached out my calloused hand to answer the incoming call right now, immediately, today, completing the cycle forever, entirely, now, perfectly, securely, and completely. I pressed the green answer button and held the device to my ear. I fully expected to hear the desperate, angry voice of a corrupt attorney or a furious creditor. Instead, a young, eager voice greeted me with deep respect. The caller introduced himself as a 25-year-old local entrepreneur looking to launch an independent graphic design firm. He had heard the massive historic estate was successfully secured from the developers and wanted to inquire about leasing one of the recently renovated brick storefronts on the main avenue. I listened carefully as he passionately outlined his ambitious business plan. I recognized the exact same fierce determination I had possessed 40 years ago when I opened my first contracting business. I did not ask him for exorbitant financial guarantees or extensive corporate references. I asked him if he understood the deep historical significance of the soil he wanted to build his future upon. He answered with profound reverence for the generations of resilient men and women who had built the community from nothing. I warmly approved his commercial application without hesitation. The sharp electronic ring of the phone was no longer a terrifying harbinger of impending destruction or malicious corporate betrayal. It was the vibrant, beautiful sound of a flourishing community actively preparing to launch the very next generation of independent leaders. I ended the call and placed the phone back onto the wooden nightstand. A deep, unshakable sense of permanent peace washed over my tired shoulders. The nightmare was completely, definitively over. The future of our cherished land was finally safe. I walked out of my bedroom and down the long hallway toward the main house's kitchen. The brilliant morning sun flooded intensely through the large bay windows, casting warm golden light across the polished oak floorboards. The heavy silence in the expansive house was no longer the oppressive, terrifying quiet of an impending tactical siege or a brutal corporate takeover. It was the absolute, unthreatened tranquility of a heavily fortified sanctuary that had successfully withstood a massive, devastating storm. I moved efficiently around the pristine kitchen, appreciating the simple, undisturbed routine of my morning. I filled the glass carafe with fresh water and scooped rich, dark grounds into the coffee maker. The machine hummed to life, filling the bright room with the deep, comforting aroma of brewing coffee. I stood by the marble counter watching the dark liquid slowly drip into the glass pot. The violent, chaotic memories of armored mercenaries kicking down doors and ruthless billionaires brandishing stolen weapons felt entirely distant now, like fading echoes of a terrible nightmare that could never harm us again. I had completely stripped away the toxic elements that threatened my family, leaving only the solid, unshakable foundation I had built with my own two hands. The profound stillness of the morning was a beautiful reward for the brutal war we had waged and won. I took 2 heavy ceramic mugs from the wooden cabinet and filled them to the brim with the steaming black coffee. I carried them carefully toward the center island, fully embracing the absolute safety of my reclaimed home. I set one of the steaming ceramic mugs down gently on the smooth marble surface of the kitchen island. Josiah sat perfectly relaxed in his favorite worn leather armchair, bathed in the bright morning sunlight. My 89-year-old father adjusted his silver reading glasses with slow, deliberate precision as he carefully reviewed the front page of the local newspaper. He looked incredibly strong and fiercely resilient, a towering monument to a man who had successfully outlived the ruthless predators who tried to erase him from existence. He had survived the brutal segregation of his youth, built a thriving community from bare dirt, and completely outsmarted the greedy corporate vultures who sought to exploit his legacy. Josiah slowly folded the newspaper and placed it neatly beside his hot coffee. He looked up at me with clear, intelligent eyes that held absolute profound peace. There was no lingering fear of forged documents or hostile takeovers in his steady gaze. He took a long, slow sip of the bitter black coffee, savoring the rich flavor with genuine appreciation. He set the mug down and offered a small, quiet smile that spoke volumes of our shared, hard-fought victory. "It is going to be a very good day, Byron," my father stated with absolute, unwavering certainty. His powerful voice carried the undeniable weight of a man who knew his life's work was finally, permanently secure from any future malicious interference. I nodded slowly in complete, absolute agreement with my resilient father. There was no triumphant orchestral music swelling in the background to celebrate our massive victory. There was no boastful, arrogant celebration or public gloating over the utter destruction of our treacherous enemies. We simply did not require any external validation for the brutal necessary actions we had taken to survive. The parasitic entities that had aggressively attempted to drain our wealth and destroy our sacred community had been surgically permanently removed from our lives. Brent was locked inside a maximum security federal penitentiary, and Morgan was facing the devastating, inescapable consequences of her own malicious greed. The sprawling historic business collective was thriving outside our windows, protected by an ironclad generational trust that no ruthless corporation could ever breach again. I sat down on the sturdy wooden stool across from Josiah, wrapping my calloused hands around the warm ceramic mug. We drank our dark coffee in comfortable, profound silence. The immense crushing burden of defending our heritage was completely gone, replaced by the quiet, unbreakable strength of two men enjoying the permanent restoration of absolute truth, enduring legacy, and unyielding order today, right now, completely, securely, and entirely forever. The most painful betrayal never comes from a stranger standing outside your house. It always comes from the people you invited inside and nourished with your own sacrifices. I spent my entire existence breaking my physical body to ensure my daughter experienced a flawless life devoid of any struggle. I shielded her from hardship so completely that she never developed a basic moral compass or genuine empathy. True love is not blindly financing the ambition of ungrateful relatives. True love requires establishing firm boundaries. You must protect your own dignity before sacrificing yourself for those who secretly despise you entirely. Tell me what you would do if your own child betrayed you for money. Leave your thoughts in the comments below and let me know which city you are watching from today. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories of justice and resilience. See you in the next video.